You're live whenever you're ready to go.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Development and Operations Standing Committee of October 12, 2021. To start, I'll read out the land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who cared for their families and communities the way we now seek to care for ours. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the late Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and respects all of the nation-to-nation agreements that have formed relationships with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history, the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community, and seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. The motion to adopt the agenda for this evening, I'll read out that the content of the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee agenda for October 12, 2021 be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Doherty. So I get out my voting cards here because I always forget. All right, all in favor? Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest this evening? Okay, seeing none, is there any business arising from the previous meeting that someone would like to raise? All right, seeing none. The next item on the agenda is deputations, and we do have one this evening, the Heritage District Buildings Material. David Conning is here. And so if I could ask if he could be led into the meeting.
He is here. I think we just need to ask him to unmute. Here he is.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if Penny Skelton is on as well. She was part of this deputation.
Through the chair to Mr. Conning. I don't see her in the attendance list yet. If Penny's here under a different name, can you please raise your hand? It doesn't look like she's joined the meeting yet, but I can join her in as soon as she gets on board, if that's okay with you, Mr. Conning.
All right. Well, thank you. I can. I'll solo it then.
Okay, we're ready. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We do have a presentation that reflects the letter that we've put forward to you. And so, yeah, we'll just jump right in. This is our review of the staff report, P 2021-21, the Heritage Building Material Review. The next slide, please. Yeah, so in the 2008 Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan and the overall objectives note that the district holds significant economic value to the local economy and must remain commercially viable. The BIA, council, and community recognize the downtown core as a key economic driver, and we have an appreciation and care for our build heritage environment and need to balance the financial sustainability, necessary building maintenance, and ongoing upgrades. The BIA has received concerns that the commercial viability of the district and its economic value to the community is at risk if changes are not considered. Next slide, please. The concern, and just a little background on this, we did send out a request for information or for feedback from property owners in the downtown, and Although sometimes it's tough to get feedback from our members, it was not tough to get feedback on this issue. They were very forthcoming. The concerns: inconsistent application of Heritage Conservation District rules. In the last 2 years, many applications were approved for non-wood windows, whereas many are refused. The next is the cost of materials. The financial struggles at this time during COVID. Insufficient municipal funding for the Heritage Grant Program to make an impactful difference and promote ongoing heritage building maintenance, especially for commercial building owners who need to complete work in a timely manner to accommodate tenants. And the last one there is the energy conservation. The next slide, please. The need for floors above ground level to have wood windows, etc. Security needs for windows and doors that may not be compatible with heritage building material requirements. There is confusion of heritage building material requirements and necessary fire-rated doors, etc. Investment in residential units above the commercial floor and damage or neglect of tenants. This will have a detrimental impact on the attainable housing available. Property owners are not willing to invest in heritage approved windows and choose to either not maintain their building exterior, board up, or install an additional window on the interior for weather protection, energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So the recommendations that we have put together, we have 9 recommendations in 4 subject areas. Next slide. Heritage building materials. In researching other heritage conservation district plans, we note more flexibility in the language regarding replacement materials, such as encourage the use of original material or use of original building material preferred. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation regarding heritage building materials would be to amend language in the document to be more flexible for replacement materials for work required above the commercial ground floor. For example, in reference to window replacements, the use of material is not defined. It simply says usually wood. And this could be amended to define when wood is mandatory and when alternate wood-like materials could be used, as noted in the following recommendation. Next slide, please. Recommendation 2 is to provide clear wording that enables windows and doors that excuse me, do not have a visual impact on the heritage character from the streetscape to propose alternative materials. For example, windows in alleyways, back doors, windows in secondary elevations. Next slide, please. The second area is the Heritage Grant Program. Our recommendation here, the first one, is to increase municipal heritage grant amount, and in particular, for works completed if constructed, replaced using original heritage material. Create a formula for grant support which reflects the amount of the investment being made by the owner in efforts to maintain the heritage of the building by using original heritage materials. Recommendation 4 is that heritage grants should be applicable to non-heritage buildings that are being required to apply certain heritage rules. And there is an Appendix A attached to our feedback to you, which shows what heritage grant programs there are in other municipalities. It's some background for you to look at, just to compare what support there is here compared to some other municipalities. And it was put together by one of our members and a major property owner in the downtown, Richard Lex. And Mr. Lex, we thank him for compiling this information. It's interesting to look at in comparison to other municipalities. Next slide, please. Heritage Tax Relief Program. This recommendation is that the town include in the 2022 budget the request to investigate and increase the Heritage Tax Rebate Program. Next slide. Heritage Permit Application. Recommendation 6 is to amend the minimum application standards to include the requirement to provide an exact image of the building material being requested, or better yet, provide a sample of the material. This will assist staff and the committee in determining the appropriate sympathetic appearance and composite material, and also impose penalties that could require the municipality to replace the windows at the property owner's expense if the installed material is not what was approved. Next slide, please. Recommendation 7 under the Heritage Permit Application is to ensure fire services is circulated the application and staff recommendations prior to committee review to ensure that the appropriate fire rating material is being used. Next slide, please. Heritage Committee. Recommendation number 8 is to ensure that applications are reviewed in a timely manner and committee members are appropriately trained as part of the onboarding process when appointing as to the roles and responsibilities and on the fair application of recommendations and consistency with the Heritage Conservation District Plan. This training to clearly identify the purview of the committee members' involvement in the application review to avoid subjective individual preferences. Next slide, please. Our final recommendation under Heritage Committee is that following the one-year trial of the external agency participation on the Heritage Committee, that reconsideration be given to reinstating the BIA representative as a voting member. And that concludes the deputation. The BIA is very aware that of the importance of the Heritage District and the importance of keeping it that way as part of our branding and our image and our history. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present this.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that presentation on behalf of the BIA. As you know, we have a staff report as item number 7 on the agenda, which deals with partly of most of what you're requesting, I would say. So the committee will raise any issues or matters they wish to have addressed at that time. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next item on the agenda is the interim control bylaw update, our regular update from our CAO.
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. I believe that the customary deck is available and has been updated for the meeting tonight. Next slide, please. So the resolution on slide 2 is the one provided to staff by council. And it asks for an update weekly, which this is, and the update does include the details that council has asked for. And I think this underlines the importance at which council has put solving our water concerns in the hierarchy, and we will fulfill this. Next slide, please. So the situation remains promising. Our current water supply is safe and available. As soon as they were aware of this difficult situation, Council, of course, has taken a very proactive and transparent approach. One of the first decisions was to maximize chlorine, which we're prepared to do when it's needed in the cold weather. And we have several years of growth available, but not enough to get to the expected 25-26 plant expansion. So we've transparently paused some development to make sure that Collingwood has the water that we need to grow as a complete community. All the ready-to-go development applications that were submitted for 2021 have received exemptions from Council, and most residential renovations and additions can continue. And in the last couple of weeks as well, we have provided, done a review of an ultraviolet option for treating water in the existing plant that looks very promising, and have proceeded with that work that would increase the amount of water available to businesses expanding in our community. And we're powering through the land use policy study. There's a little bit more on that in a moment. Next slide, please. From the water capacity of the plant situation, next slide. The plant expansion, I just mentioned that we are moving forward with the selection of an ultraviolet manufacturer. So that will have some ultraviolet installed in the existing plant by approximately 2023. And then that will be the type that we will also install in the water treatment plant expansion. I mentioned a couple of the other points last week, so I won't go through those again. And I think we can move on to slide 6, please. This graphic on slide 6 talks about the steps toward 2025-26 winter, and it hasn't changed since last week. So we're just well into getting the complete preliminary design in place this fall. And so no changes this week, but we remain on track. Next slide, please. And the remaining water supply is as it was last week as well. Of course, the allocation that's remaining hasn't changed since Council made its latest decision in late July of 2021. And I did receive a question during the week this week. And one of the questions was, it looks like the conversion for winter and summer are a little different. And in fact, they are a little different in winter and summer, but the underlying root cause of that is that people tend on average across the community to use different amounts of water per household in the summer and in the winter. So that's part of the complexities that are transparently managed by our engineering and water treatment staff. So one thing that will happen over time now that we have a plan to use ultraviolet treatment, hopefully to be installed in 2023, our summer and winter capacity remaining will be equalized. So for example, in the SDUs column, which is the middle column, we'd end up with a remaining summer allocation moving from the 495 to 1,285, which is that last row. So we're not quite, they say you, one in the hand is worth two in the bush. So we want to make sure that that's well underway and certainty to be delivered before we allocate that water. But it certainly is making us much more comfortable with moving forward at our normal pace of growth in Collingwood as we see this getting delivered. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the land use planning policy study. Next slide, please. This is just a map that hasn't changed since Council did its approvals in late July. And I don't often say what the symbols mean, but the little diamonds were the first two areas that received exemptions to go forward with water. The green circles were the ones that received exemptions in July. And the other squares that are gray in color are people who submitted for exemptions but weren't quite ready to construct in 2021. So they'll be considered in the future as water is allocated within the community. So we have a good spattering across the municipality, as you can see. Next slide, please. This is the standard update on the interim control bylaw exemptions, but basically if you got an exemption, you should know by now. If you received an exemption and you're ready to build, you can apply for your building permit. If you need to go through more steps in planning, then you can go through those steps in planning and they'll be presented to council as soon as you and staff are ready. Otherwise, if you have, for example, one of the gray squares that didn't receive an exemption for 2021, it's important that you know that the exemptions are exemptions to the 1-year interim control bylaw. Once we get through the land use planning study, council will use the results of those study to manage water going forward. So there will be more water allocated in priority with the values of the community. So we'll wait to hear a little more as that land use planning study is completed. Next slide, please. And for those of you with very good eyes who want to pull up the slide after this meeting, there were some adjustments to the mid time frame of the study. Right now we're at 5B, which is just above center. It's the workshop with counselors, so council interviews individually or in small groups. And that's happening through the middle of October. So that's shifted a little out from the end of September, beginning of October, which caused a few of all the red X's to slide. But so far, and I hope that this will be the case, it hasn't caused any of the end dates to slide. So we're still looking at a final presentation to council in mid-December. And then we would be presenting some other approvals early in the new year. And there will be meetings with the community and developers and engineers from our community in the interim so that their input can be considered. Next slide, please. Since the last update, I did mention that the study is meeting with council members, so we'll just go to the next slide. And we were asked a couple of weeks ago, so we now have an updated slide on the status of the exemptions. So of the 41 interim control bylaw exempted projects that were ready to go in 2021 or could be ready to go in 2021, if you look at them by who's pulled building permits, 11 projects, I'm looking at the left side of the slide right now, 11 projects have their building permits of the 41. 5 of them have submitted building permit applications that are being processed, and 25 projects have not yet submitted for their building permits. So 61% have not accessed the water that they've been, or moved toward the building permit stage of accessing the water that they've been allocated. And you can look at that exact same information just based on a water amount. So if you look at that same information, the percentage of allocated capacity by building permit status is that 19% of the water that was allocated by council in 2020, since the interim control bylaw, has moved on to the building permit stage, but quite a bit has not. 77% we have not received building permits applications on to date. Next slide, please. And that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions should there be any, Chair Hamlin.
Oh, thank you for that update. Would there be any questions? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through to the CAO, I just wanted to have some clarification. I think one of our local developers, I read in, I believe in a contribution to the Heritage Committee, had cited the ICBL as slowing them down or holding them up. But my understanding is even though they're not at the water allocation part of their requests or their paperwork, that they can still continue moving their application forward. And are we clarifying that with the developers when we see those letters come into our standing committees or into town hall or to the planning department?
Do you have an answer for that?
Thank you, Chair Hamlin, through you to Councillor Jeffrey. And so the way that we've set the process up is that anyone who has received an exemption to the ICBL from council can proceed through the planning process to a building permit and be issued a building permit should they warrant it, and should council approve the appropriate planning applications. However, if someone has not received an exemption, they can move up to the next decision by council or to the building permit stage, but can't move into that stage. So I would hope that our staff experts at committees have been making that clear to anyone that's been asking. I'm sure that there was a period when the ICBL was first put into place prior to exemptions, when people were paused for some weeks or a month and a half. And I hope that we're past that stage now, and anyone who needs to move forward can do so. Hopefully that will answer your question.
Yes, I think it does. It's just that my understanding is that it wouldn't hold people up on moving their planning work until they got to where they needed that exemption for the water allocation, which would be tied to the land use planning. But unless this developer is already at that point and waiting, which I couldn't discern from the letter. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody was being kept on the same page as to what they could and could not be doing when I saw it come into a committee as opposed to into our consent agenda or something like that.
CEO Skinner?
Thank you, Chair Hamlin, and through you also to Councillor Jeffrey. I will speak with Director Valentine about also maybe we do need to send out an update to our development community as well, just to make sure that they are fully clear on what they can and can't do, because largely we want them to be able to move good business ideas forward that will be positive for the community.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? No? Thank you very much for that update. So on to staff reports. We have 6 staff reports on the agenda tonight. The first one is one that Deputy Mayor Hall has asked if we could defer until he arrives at the meeting. He's had a conflict with the meeting and expected to be about 40 minutes late. Would there be any objection to deferring this item until he arrives? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. I think maybe I would ask the people who are in attendance, who are waiting for this item. I mean, we can make that decision for sure to delay it for the deputy mayor, but if people have tuned in with specific timelines, hoping to hear our discussion, I wouldn't want to push it off.
Well, I hear you. I think, my preference would be, given his and deputy mayor's involvement in this matter, that it would make sense to defer this item until he arrives, and it's only 5:30. But we could review this again, maybe at 6 if he's not here. Would that be satisfactory? Okay. Are there any other objections? No. Seeing none. All right. We'll go to the second staff report. This is item 7.2. The staff report is P 2021-28 Heritage Permit Application, 12 4th Street West, recommendation for partial refusal. And we have a member of our planning staff tonight to give this report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may provide some introductory remarks, we do have Community Planner Tico here to take you through the report in detail. But in a general sense, this report is related to work that was initially undertaken without a heritage permit at 12 4th Street, which is a significant building within the downtown Collingwood Heritage Conservation District, and the evaluation of the subsequent application for a permit to recognize that work that has been completed. So I just wanted to draw committee's attention to that this is a relatively unique situation in a couple of different ways. First, most of the work on the building had been completed in advance of an application for a heritage permit. And second is that the consideration of the permit application must come before this committee and council. The approval of heritage permits is delegated to staff with consultation with the Heritage Committee, but refusals or partial refusals of this nature must be considered by committee and council. The recommendation today is for a partial approval and a partial refusal, and that is supported by the Heritage Committee. And just before I turn it over to Community Planner Justin Tico to present the details of his report, I think it's important for committee to understand that ultimately council can approve or refuse the permit application as they see fit, and can include conditions with that permit issuance. And that could include choosing to approve the permit for all the work that has been done to date. Should the permit be partially or fully refused, the owner does have appeal rights to that decision. And if there is no appeal, there are a couple options for the owner. They can submit permits to restore the property to its previous condition, or council can pursue enforcement actions. So with those introductory remarks, I would turn it over to Justin Tico to take us through his presentation.
Thank you. Right. Good evening, committee. So this is staff report 2021-28, heritage permit application for 12 4th Street West. Next slide, please. So 12 4th Street West is identified as a significant building within the downtown Collingwood Heritage Conservation District. It's designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of that district. Heritage designation is registered on the title of designated properties. This property is located mid-block between here Ontario Street and Pine Streets and on 4th Street. And alterations to the exterior of properties in the Heritage District require the issuance of a heritage permit prior to undertaking the works. Next slide, please. So these are two images of the subject property as it appeared previously. The one on the left when purchased by the current owner, and the one on the right as it appeared in fall 2020. Next slide, please. So on July 22nd of this year, town staff received a complaint about exterior masonry being painted at 12 4th Street West without a heritage permit. Bylaw enforcement attended the site on July 23rd and confirmed that painting had been done, primarily on the east side of the house. Planning staff spoke to the owner also on July 23rd and confirmed that a heritage permit was required to be obtained before starting work, including for the painting that was underway. Staff noted two other alterations that had occurred on the property without a heritage permit, which include removal of the chimney and removal of the front entrance roof. Staff asked the owner to submit a heritage permit for the painting and other works and followed up the same day with an email on how to apply and the deadline to be considered at a special Heritage Committee meeting on August 9th. Next slide, please. On August 3rd, planning staff requested bylaw enforcement reattend the site to see if works continued without a permit. A visit confirmed the remainder of the masonry had been painted without a heritage permit having been issued. A heritage permit application was received for the works that had been done, as well as to replace the existing front door on August 5th. At the August 9th Heritage Committee meeting, the staff recommendation was consistent with the Heritage Committee recommendation before you this evening. The exception was that the staff recommendation included approval for the removal of the entrance roof. In summary, the Heritage Committee's recommendation is to partially approve the permit to permit removal of the chimney and painting of the window frames, soffit, and fascia in black, and for the following to be refused: painting of the masonry, replacement of the front door, and removal of the entrance roof. A separate heritage permit has since been applied for and issued to restore the existing front door. So that matter isn't anticipated to require any further discussion. And so, for clarity, refusal of that portion of the permit is still recommended by staff. Next slide, please. So removal of the chimney and the eyebrow entrance roof remove elements that contribute to the property's heritage character and diminish the district's heritage attributes. And had these not already been undertaken or had not already been removed, staff would not have supported their removal. Notwithstanding that, removal of these two features does not harm the integrity of the rest of the building and could be restored in the future. With regard to painting, there's two areas of painting. The painting of the soffit, fascia, and window frames in black are supportable works. The masonry painting, including the foundation, brickwork in white, and the stone windowsills in black, is not supportable. Painting of masonry can cause potential harm to the integrity of the building, as it's known to trap moisture and limit the ability of masonry to breathe. This can result in masonry falling apart through freeze-thaw cycles. The district plan notes that brickwork performs best when unpainted. The painting most fundamentally alters the character of the house in a manner that's inconsistent with the heritage attributes of the district. There are other painted masonry buildings in the district. The majority of these buildings, which were painted at the time or prior to the district being created, and the owners have not opted to apply to remove that paint. In some cases, non-significant buildings in the district have received permits to paint brickwork to allow that building to better blend in with its surroundings. So a recent example would be 10 3rd Street, which is the building that currently contains Nicky's Donuts. The existing front door is wood and original, and as previously mentioned, since writing the report, the owner has obtained a heritage permit to restore the existing front door. Next slide, please. So staff are requesting council deem the heritage permit complete and that the permit be issued and / partially refused consistent with the Heritage Committee's recommendation. Should the permit not be appealed or an appeal dismissed, the owner may apply to rectify the alterations or the town could pursue enforcement actions. So council needs to deem the permit application complete because only council has the authority to refuse the heritage permit application. Council could decide that they don't have enough information to make the decision or require additional details or documents prior to making that decision that staff may not have anticipated. If council does require further information, then they have more time to attain it without triggering a legislated timeline to make a decision. Once the application is deemed complete and a notice of receipt is issued, council has 90 days to make a decision. Staff are recommending that council support the Heritage Committee's recommendation. The opportunity to rectify the matter via the permit route allows the owner to seek council approval for the alterations. But the town could have and still can immediately pursue enforcement actions for the works undertaken without a heritage permit. There is no policy or legislated time frame that supports a specific time for the town that the town may want to wait to allow the owner to do the right thing before enforcement is pursued. There are two enforcement action options available to the town under the Ontario Heritage Act. One is to pursue charges for the work without a permit. However, this alone may not result in restoration, but fines. And secondly is for council through a resolution to direct that the property be restored to the previous condition that they would like to see it restored to at the expense of the owner. And should council want to give the owner time to rectify the situation without enforcement actions, staff would recommend providing at minimum a year for the owner to obtain a permit and line up a contractor, since paint removal would be challenging in the winter. And that's all, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the public before the committee considers the report?
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. I have Jesse Hamilton wishing to speak and Val Hamilton, so we'll just allow them to talk.
Thank you.
All right, you guys should be able to go.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the committee and town staff, for your time today. We are Jesse and Val Hamilton, new owners of the small home on 12 4th Street that Justin was just speaking about. Val's logged into the meeting separately today. In preparation for our meeting, we sent a letter to all members of the committee last month, and I'd like to thank all of you for having read it. As I hope you can understand, it is never easy making a mistake of any sort, let alone a mistake that results in an outcome like this one so far. This has been and continues to be a pretty emotional experience for us. At the same time, we also understand that this process exists for a reason, and we want to be respectful of that as well. I'm going to sort of skip most of the things that were in the letter. I do think it's just important because it was brought up today that we were contacted about the painting. I just want to be clear that it was not clear to us at any point that we needed to stop painting or we had have done that. But everything else in the letter, I'll let speak for itself. We bought this home very excited to live in downtown Collingwood. We love everything that the downtown represents. I've been a part of the community for a long time, and Val recently has joined it over the last 8 years or so. We wanted to make a positive impact in the community, which was including the investment we made in our home itself. And as you read in our letter, our daughter, Val's stepdaughter, was born and raised in Collingwood, and this house is perfect as she will start high school here next year. We would like to let you know that we have successfully worked through the process of refurbishing our front door within the regulations of the district and with Justin Teagle's support. I'd also like to let you know that similarly, we are starting that same process with Justin with regards to the dormer that we removed. We're optimistic that we will find a suitable solution with that as well. These outcomes with the door and the dormer are maybe not ideal for our family, but we certainly are willing to make it work as much as we can. And we are no longer requesting that these two issues be reconsidered by our committee. What we are asking today is that you reconsider the decision of the Heritage Committee related to the exterior painting of our house. We ask that you believe us when we tell you that we didn't know we were doing something wrong. And this is not a case of our family maliciously ignoring the rules in hopes of asking for forgiveness later. To be honest, there have been times in this process where we felt that this assumption was made about us. We know that this stuff can happen, and we know it's important for you to determine one from the other, but we assure you this is not an example of that. We painted our house because of the many houses in Collingwood that have painted bricks already. And we felt that the exterior of our home had been left in disrepair, and we wanted to create something that we could be proud of. In our opinion, these painted houses look beautiful and only add to the beauty and character of the town. Although a number of these homes are not in the Heritage District, as we shared with you in our letter, there are over 20 houses that we saw within the Heritage District alone that had painted bricks. In looking for ways to make our home what we had hoped for it to be, it seemed reasonable to us that copying these homes, almost all of which are larger, grander, and likely older than ours, it was reasonable to us that that was a good idea. We honestly thought that people would compliment our home after we made those changes to it, and I'm happy to say that some people have stopped by to say nice things. Through this process, we now know that one goal of the district is to preserve brick interiors. However, given that so many homes exist that do not adhere to this regulation, this was a very easy mistake for us, or for anyone, frankly, to make. It's hard not to feel that it is unfair for us to be subject to rules that do not apply to everyone. We are asking that your committee support our request to paint our house with our sincerest apologies that we are asking for it after the fact. We recognize that we are asking for something that is contrary to the goals of the Heritage District, but at the same time, we do not feel that our investment in our small home should be made the example of. To do so would mean a sizable cost and sacrifice to our family simply because we made a mistake and painted our house similarly to numerous houses in the district already. It's a mistake we wish we didn't make. There would have been alternatives, I'm sure, to achieve the same thing that we did, but we certainly would like for you to reconsider and allow us to keep the paint there. If there's any questions that I could answer, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would anyone have any questions of Mr. Hamilton? No? Okay, Becky, does Val wish to speak as well?
No, my husband said it all very well, and it just makes me very upset. So I have nothing to say.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, are there any other deputants to speak to this item, Becky?
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. There's no other hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read in the staff recommendation. The staff report P 2021-28 Heritage Permit Application, 12 4th Street West, recommendation for partial refusal be received, and that council deem the heritage permit application complete and direct staff to issue a notice of receipt to the applicant. And further, that council support Heritage Committee recommendation HER-057-2021 as follows. That the Collingwood Heritage Committee recommend the heritage permit be partially approved to permit one, the removal of the chimney, noting that it's already been removed. Two, painting the window frames, soffit and fascia black. And further, that the heritage permit for the following be refused. One, painting masonry, including the foundation, stonework, windowsills, and brickwork. Two, replacement of the front door. Three, removal of the front entrance eyebrow roof, noting that it has already been removed. And further, the council directs staff to issue notice of refusal and issuance of a heritage permit in accordance with recommendation HER-057-2021 within 90 days of serving the applicant with a notice of receipt. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the staff report, please? Councillor Doherty and Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Would any of our committee members have comments or questions regarding the staff report? Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you to Community Planner Treacle, I note in the report it says that the heritage designation is noted on the land registry, so that when you purchase the building, presumably it would be available for that information would be available. I'm just wondering if there's other steps that we at the municipality take to make sure that people in the heritage district understand the issues around their properties.
Through the chair to the mayor. So the onus is on the owner ultimately to make sure that they're complying with the Ontario Heritage Act. However, of course, there's always more that municipalities can do, including us, to educate property owners about their obligations under the Ontario Heritage Act and how to apply for heritage permits and when those are required. So certainly all of that information is available on the town's website as well. And staff are able to answer those questions at any time, but certainly we could put more information out there too.
Any follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm wondering as well, I note that the Hamiltons have told us that the last two items with respect to the canopy and the door are being pursued, and they've applied for a permit for that. And so I'm assuming they'd be eligible for a heritage grant for those works if they apply.
So through the chair to the mayor, in terms of the door restoration, they have applied for a heritage permit, which has been issued. That work typically would be able to and eligible to apply for a grant. This year, we don't have any budget left for 2021. However, if they wanted to undertake those works in 2022, they could certainly apply for an application to do that. I would have to look into whether a grant would be available to restore the feature that has been removed. At this point in time, I haven't received a permit application to restore the canopy.
Okay, well, assuming maybe that the canopy was not in great shape and needed replacement, would they be able to apply for a heritage grant if that were the case?
Certainly, if the feature was still there to repair it, absolutely, it would be something that would be eligible, given the fact that it was removed and needs to be replaced. That's something that I would have to review the program to confirm.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. I may have an amendment as we move forward. I'll just be interested in hearing the comments of other council members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else have questions? Councillor Doherty.
Yes, thank you. The proponent indicated that he was intending to follow the example of other properties in town, which appear to be heritage structures that do have painted brick. And I just was wondering if you could reiterate the reason why those structures have not been asked to come into conformity with the bylaw. I threw you to Planner Tico.
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty. So there are a number of, there's a handful of painted masonry buildings in the district. The majority of those buildings, and so far as I'm aware, are buildings where they were painted at the time that the district came into place. The owners of those buildings are not obligated to remove that paint. They do require a permit to repaint them or to have that paint removed, but we can't, we can certainly encourage them to remove that paint, but they're not obligated to remove that paint. They're not doing anything wrong if they're, not touching their building and leaving it painted. Of course, these standards and the heritage policies of the district plan and for individually designated properties only apply to designated properties. So of course, we have a number of historic homes across Collingwood that do not have any formal heritage status under the Ontario Heritage Act. And so they do not require heritage permits to do such things as to paint their brick or remove paintwork from brick. They can do those as they see fit.
Okay, thank you. Would it be possible to provide the proponent with a longer period of time in which to remove the paint? So you had recommended in your report 1 year, and I'm very cognizant of the expense that would be involved. So my thinking was, could we provide, for example, 2 years, after which time the building would have to be restored to its original condition, or even 3 years, or whatever you would recommend. I guess the timing would be contingent upon how long it takes for painted brick to start to have a deleterious impact on the structure of the house.
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty. So if council wanted to pass a resolution to the effect that you were seeking to have the property, so you would refuse the permit as recommended for the portions that are recommended for refusal, approve the others, and then to pass a resolution to have the property restored to the previous condition, so effectively the paint removed. I think you have any ability to apply any timeline that you want to that. I recommended at least a year on the basis that I don't think it would be advisable to remove that paint during the winter. Of course, you are correct. I think the longer that paint is left and the more freeze-thaw cycles that are there, the more potential there is for damage to occur to the building. So there's a balancing act there between a reasonableness and allowing them to obtain the right people and undertake the work, and the amount of time we're willing to leave the building in the condition that it's in.
Okay, thank you. Okay, based on that, I'd be likely to ask for an extension in the period of time that we would require the building to be restored of at least 2 years. Another question I have, and the mayor has already asked about the heritage grant that might be applicable for the works that have been approved as part of the heritage permit. Because this is a significant building, is it also possible that the proponent could apply for the heritage tax incentive once the work to restore the building is completed? Is that something else that they would be eligible for?
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty, so they would need to also enter into a heritage conservation and maintenance agreement. But provided once they have that in place, I see no reason why they shouldn't be able to participate in that program. And the agreement would set out the details for maintenance of that property moving forward. And so provided that they continued to maintain their property on a go-forward basis in accordance with that agreement and the district plan, they would continue to be eligible for that program to apply annually.
Thank you. I'm torn between the notion of reinforcing a lapse in judgment and an understanding that it was in fact a lapse in judgment and no other reason that we find ourselves in this position today. But I feel that these might be fair options to present to the proponent. I guess just one other question. If the town were to undertake to remove the paint and bill the homeowner, is that a bill that would be payable immediately, or is that a bill that could be applied to the tax bill?
So through the chair to Councillor Doherty, so my understanding from the Ontario Heritage Act is I don't think there's any timeline for which the cost of those works has to be reimbursed to the municipality. So I think there's flexibility there, but I think that would be a question for finance to confirm. But my understanding is that would be the way that the town would be reimbursed for those expenses, would be through the tax roll.
Great, okay, thank you. Okay, those are my questions. And I would be, well, I'd like to maybe hear what the mayor is proposing in terms of an amendment, but I certainly am thinking about an amendment as well.
Thank you for your questions and comments. Councillor Jeffrey.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So my questions have all been asked. And just to reassure, I do hear the remorse in the Hamiltons in terms of what happened. I guess the communication on July 23rd still isn't clear to me, you know, because I guess the cost could have been reduced had it been clear that they shouldn't proceed with painting the balance. But at the end of the day, I think our lighthouse is a perfect example why you shouldn't paint things and have moisture get into it and then it implodes. So I quite appreciate both the mayor and Councillor Doherty's comments, and I'll weigh in on the amendments. So thank you.
Thank you. So I have a few questions as well. Community planner Tickle, you mentioned specifically Nikki's Donuts and the painting of that building. Could you explain the circumstances of that?
Yeah, so that building, so that permit was issued prior to me being in this role, but my understanding was that that building is what's considered a non-significant heritage building. So meaning based on the date of its construction and its style, it's deemed not to contribute to the character of the heritage district. And so there it was seen them doing a light white painting would help to that building to blend in with the district, given that the existing characteristics of that building didn't help that building support the characteristics of the district.
Okay, I understand. And if the municipality was to paint the house, does the owner have to be in a situation of default, or can the municipality make an arrangement to do that? With
for clarity, if the municipality was to remove the paint, the town was to remove the paint?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So my understanding is the town can, under the act, it has to be council that makes that decision. But council can at any time, is my understanding, have someone go in and remove that paint and expense it back to the property owner. And I don't think there's any, that work has occurred without a permit. And so I don't think there's any, restriction on when that can occur.
Okay. I'm also, can hear the remorse from the owners, and I do have a lot of sympathy for, I'll say, an ordinary person buying a home in the Heritage District, not knowing specifically what they're getting into, and without any information, falling into this trap. So anyway, I'll just say that, and see where we go from here. Mayor Saunderson, did you wish to bring forward an amendment at this time?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And it is consistent with the statements made by Councillor Doherty. I think we all recognize this is a very unfortunate situation. However, the Heritage District rules were not followed, and the processes weren't followed. And so we find ourselves in this situation. And so what I would be recommending is, and I think as I understood Planner Tico's presentation, the town staff were recommending a timeline of approximately a year, although that's not reflected in the actual resolution. And so I would add to the resolution that the owners have a period of 2 years to perform the required work.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Doherty. Okay. Now this is where I need a bit of help. Will you be bringing? Yes, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I have one question. Would that extended timeline be now registered on title with the property?
Community Planner Tico, do you know the answer to that?
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty, I don't believe it would be. I'm not certain whether we would have the ability to do that. That would be something that I would have to check.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
So a follow-up to that then is, if the current owners sold the property before the 2 years was up and it wasn't done, how do we monitor and that we're not imposing on the next owners to make that correction at their cost?
Through the chair to Councillor Jeffrey, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure what the answer is. If council passes a resolution that provides that paint be removed by the owner within 2 years, and after such time, then the municipality will take that action. If the owner has not, we would have to look into ways to track that to make sure that it doesn't get lost if the ownership does change. But I think ultimately, whoever was the owner at that time would be, if the ownership did change, would be obligated to follow through on that.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a follow-up to Councillor Jeffrey's question, are there perhaps you could report further to the council when this comes forward to council if you find additional information on that? Is that possible? Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this matter? No, so we're prepared to vote. We'll vote on the amendment first. All those in favor? Carried unanimously, and then we'll now vote on the main motion. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, it's now 6 o'clock and Deputy Mayor Hall has not arrived yet. Deputy Clerk Dahl, have you heard at all from Deputy Mayor Hall?
Through the chair to the committee, I have not heard from him yet.
Okay. Are there many people waiting for this item? Can you tell?
Through the chair, maybe what I can get everyone to do that's sitting in the attendees list is, if you are interested in this item, if you could raise your hand and then I can do a count. It appears that we'll have 2 people that are interested in speaking to the matter.
Well, what would the committee be willing to entertain a continued deferral to say 6:30? Yeah. Any opposed? No. Okay, we'll continue to defer this item and we'll go on to the, what is the third staff report tonight? That would be P 2021-31, 40 Sandford Fleming. This is the Isowater property, amending site plan agreement. Who would be doing an overview? That would be Director Valentine. Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can certainly kick things off with respect to this report. It is in response to an application to amend an existing site plan agreement for 40 Sandford Fleming Drive on behalf of the Isowater Corporation. You might recall that at the last meeting of this committee, a resolution was passed and then ratified by council to delegate minor changes to site plan agreements to the Director of Planning, Building and Economic Development. But as this change being proposed is for a new industrial building and associated parking, it would not be considered minor. And therefore, that's why you see this application before you today. Staff have reviewed the proposal for consistency and conformity to the relevant land use planning instruments and are recommending approval. This project was granted an exemption from the interim control bylaw. Of particular note, through the application of the town's urban design manual, staff are of the opinion that the site plan would enhance the overall appearance of the facility and improve the streetscape along Sandford Fleming Drive. You might also notice that the resolution looks a little bit different, and that's because staff worked with the applicant to address some supply chain issues that they were having related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was translated in a deferral of the timing to provide securities when those materials would be available. We do have community planner Ayers here with us today to present the details of her report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Valentine, and good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the proposed amending site plan control agreement for 40 Sandford Fleming Drive. And as Director Valentine indicated, I can also confirm that the proposed development did receive an exemption to the provisions of the interim control bylaw in July of this year, and a total of 0.74 single dwelling unit equivalents of water has been allocated to the proposed development. Next slide, please. So this is a 2018 aerial photograph of the subject lands. They are located on the south side of Sandford Fleming Drive. The lands immediately to the south of the subject property are currently vacant, but they are designated and zoned for future environmental protection and industrial park uses. And just to note that the portion of the lands that are zoned for environmental protection represents a proposed stormwater management pond that was part of a draft approved subdivision that has actually lapsed several years ago. So I'm not sure if that will end up being environmental protection lands in the future, but right now it was for a future use that has not been constructed. And the remaining surrounding land uses are predominantly representative of industrial park uses along Sandford Fleming Drive to the north, east, and west of the property. Next slide, please. So this is simply a photo of the Isowater facility located at 40 Sandford Fleming Drive as it exists today. Next slide, please. So again, I always apologize for the resolution of these site plan drawings when we have to get them onto a PowerPoint presentation. But the proposed amendment to the site plan involves the construction of one additional industrial building, approximately 589 square meters or 6,336 square feet in size behind the existing industrial building, as well as the provision of additional parking or surface parking to accommodate a total of 24 parking spaces, including one accessible parking space. And just to orient you, the existing building is a white rectangle, about a third of the way into the property. Sandford Fleming Drive would be at the top of the screen, and the proposed new industrial building is perpendicular to the existing building, but located immediately behind it. The proposal also includes the provision of one delivery space adjacent to the new building and a more formalized outdoor amenity area with bench seating and bicycle racks is also proposed at the front of the building. And although it is anticipated that the new building will be concealed from the street by the existing building, the owner has confirmed that the proposed steel siding will be color matched to the existing building to allow for a seamless transition between the two structures on the property. Next slide, please. So again, apologies for the transparency and resolution. This is a slide of the proposed landscaping for the development. A more enhanced landscaping treatment than what currently exists is proposed along the frontage of the property to help buffer and soften both the new parking area at the front of the building as well as the existing building itself. And just for committee's information, the original landscaping proposal was simply a cedar hedge along the front of the new parking lot. Planning Services and the town's landscape architect peer reviewer raised concerns about this landscaping approach, and the applicant worked quite well with the town to create a more appropriate mix of trees, shrubs, and perennials along the front of the property boundary that, in Planning Services' opinion, will improve the Sandford Fleming streetscape in relation to the subject property. I also note there are a total of 8 trees proposed to be removed as a result of the development, and you can see there are circles with large black X's in them. So 5 of the trees are located at the very rear of the property, and 3 are trees that exist right in front of the existing building. However, with the additional trees that are proposed to be planted, it will actually result in a net increase to the tree canopy on the subject property, and it's an increase from an existing 22% to 33.5% at maturity. And as committee is aware, the town's urban design manual requires a minimum tree canopy of 30% on a subject property. So this is bringing the property into conformity with that aspect of the urban design manual. Next slide, please. So the recommendation before the committee this evening is that council enact and pass an authorization bylaw to execute an amending site plan control agreement subject to the receipt of the required securities within 1 year of the date of this approval to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, Building and Economic Development. So following the proposed development receiving an exemption to the interim control bylaw in July of this year, the property owner learned in August that due to supply chain timelines, they would not be able to receive their construction materials until approximately February 2022. Planning Services, we note that Applevale Properties Limited, the property owner, has already signed the amending site plan control agreement and submitted the required fees and insurance certificate that are required through the amending agreement. However, because of these construction supply time or delays, they have requested that the provision of the $104,774 in securities be deferred until they are closer to commencing construction. And per the amending agreement, securities can be provided in the form of cash, a certified check, or a letter of credit from a financial institution. So it is anticipated that the securities will be provided sometime in winter of 2022. However, per the recommendation I read you earlier, we are recommending that they be required within 1 year of the date of approval in case there are any future unforeseen delays that may occur. And just to stress that should council approve staff recommendation, the amending site plan control agreement would not be executed until such time as the required securities are submitted to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, Building and Economic Development. So this concludes my presentation of the file. I'm available to answer any questions, and I understand that representatives from Isowater Corporation and the project engineer are also in attendance this evening should there be any specific questions for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the public on this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this matter, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of the screen. It doesn't look like anyone wishes to speak at this time.
Okay, so I'll read in the recommendation that staff report P 2021-31 40 Sandford Fleming Isowater amending site plan agreement be received, and that council enact and pass an authorization bylaw to execute an amending site plan control agreement for the property municipally addressed as 40 Sandford Fleming Drive, subject to the receipt of the required securities within 1 year of the date of this approval to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, Building and Economic Development. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Jeffrey, Mayor Saunderson, thank you. Would the standing committee members have any questions or comments regarding the staff report? Mayor Saunderson.
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an important part of our ecosystem that we continue to expand our local businesses. And as we'll see in our discussion of our growth projections, for the amount of residential growth, we need to generate jobs. So it's very exciting to see this moving forward and doing it while adding to our tree canopy. And so I'm very happy to support this proposal.
Well said. Okay, so if there's no other comments, then all those in favor? And that's passed unanimously. Welcome, Deputy Mayor Hall. We have been deferring item, let me just go back. The first staff report tonight, and we'll just move now to that staff report. So this is the item P 2021-21, request for a potential review of materials and design guidance in the downtown Collingwood Heritage Conservation District. This has been deferred from a September meeting of this committee. I understand someone on our planning staff will be making a presentation. Over to you, Director Valentine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In response to concerns raised by the BIA staff report 2021-21 was presented respecting a potential review of material and design guidance in the downtown Collingwood Heritage Conservation District Plan. In the evaluation of that request, both staff and the town's Heritage Committee, it was recommended in the report that you see on the agenda here today that a study not be undertaken to amend the district plan. As I understand it, committee deferred this item pending further conversation with the BIA. And as you heard from the delegate earlier in this meeting, mid last week, the BIA did provide a more detailed response, which was very well covered by the delegation. And it was quite helpful for staff to further understand the concerns of the BIA in this regard. So as the response does include 9 specific recommendations, several of which do go beyond the scope of the original staff report, we would respectfully request that committee refer the matter back to staff and the Heritage Committee in order to update the report to provide a comprehensive response to all 9 of the BIA's recommendations. However, I'd like to note that recommendation 5, being the request to increase the heritage tax rebate program, is being addressed as item 7.4 on the agenda today. And I'd also like to highlight that the BIA's recommendations, they range in their complexity, ease of implementation, and budget impacts. But to give the committee and the BIA some comfort, staff have already started reviewing best practices at other municipalities as a path forward to address some of the more straightforward concerns that the BIA has brought to our attention. Should there be any questions at the appropriate time, Madam Chair, we have Community Planner Justin Teakle still with us today, and he is the author of the original staff report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I understand that was very well explained. Would anyone like to move a deferral of this matter? That's Councillor Jeffrey. A seconder would be Councillor Doherty. Thank you. And Deputy Clerk Dahl.
I would just like to clarify through you, Madam Chair, that the motion that's on the agenda is to refer the staff report back to staff.
Okay. So what you're suggesting is that we just proceed with the staff report as presented?
So Madam Chair, the recommendation that's on the agenda is that council refer the staff report back to staff for reconsideration, as well as the Heritage Committee to provide opportunity to review the correspondence from the BIA. So that would be
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So perhaps I should be asking then firstly if anyone from the public would like to address this.
Yeah, we can definitely ask the public because this is a referral. It's not a straight out deferral. So if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak to this matter before it gets referred back to staff, could you please raise your hand? And we have Richard Lax here.
Go ahead, Mr. Lax.
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. And I'm very happy to hear this is being referred back to the Heritage Committee. There's a lot there in the BIA recommendations. and I won't address them all right now, but there are a few things that I was concerned about, and I wanted just to quickly bring them out. The sort of the concern the BIA has that the commercial viability of the district and its economic value is at risk if these changes are not considered, I think is really off base. I think one of the reasons we have such a economically viable downtown is because of the Heritage District and because of the great guidance that that district and the Heritage Plan has provided over the last almost 20 years to see a beautiful restoration of the downtown. So I felt that was a little bit offside. These changes are also that the BIA are asking for in terms of material. They're not minor administrative changes. And I very much have a great deal of respect for the planning report that came out on this issue. The staff report that came out on this issue a while back, and I think it was absolutely correct that these type of changes to material can't be made outside of a complete review of the district rules. Just very quickly, I am a heritage building owner. I'm speaking as a BIA member. My wife and I own several designated buildings in the Heritage District, and I can assure you that following the heritage standards as written in the district plan is sustainable. It is totally economically sustainable to follow the rules and maintain your building under these heritage standards. I think there's many examples of property owners who support this. Of course, countless property owners who've followed the rules over the past 18 or so years. I think it's unfortunate the BIA didn't bring that out in their deputation. Naturally, there's some people who don't want to follow the rules, and it does add extra cost. There's no question. But I know of people that have invested in our downtown specifically because they like the fact that we have a heritage district and that there's some solid rules there, and that'll protect their investment. Having said that, there's no question that heritage buildings are expensive to maintain, and that is why the Heritage Committee does provide grants and tax relief. Those grants have fallen behind in times, and they definitely need some improvement, and I'm very happy to see the BIA supporting that and that there is progress being made on at least the tax rebate side. And I think it'd be nice to see the Heritage Grant increased. Inflation has really eaten away at that in the past 15 years, and to find a level that's based more on the average that you would see in the province. So ultimately, I'd really like to see some dialogue between the BIA and the Heritage Committee. There probably is some potential for exemptions. The Heritage Committee does do exemptions quite often, and I think they haven't been consistent in their exemptions. So some policies that would probably be helpful as long as those exemptions are for non-significant elevations, and as long as those exemptions still require that the design and the, as an example, the windows are architecturally correct. So I have a lot more I'd love to say on that, but I'll use my opportunity at the Heritage Committee to make some further comments. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Would there be anyone else, Deputy Clerk?
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. I have Kathy Druder from the Heritage Committee.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Kathy.
Sorry. Thank you for letting me speak. Yes, I just want to support from me personally, because the Heritage Committee has not seen this deputation or the recommendations that the BIA have given forth this evening. So I welcome the opportunity for that to be discussed at an upcoming meeting, which we have one next Monday. So that would be great. And then we can talk about that a little bit more. And welcome, as far as me personally goes, any opportunity to work together with the BIA, having had my family been involved with it since day one.
Okay, well, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much for offering those comments. All right. So if that's all from the public, I'm going to read in the recommendation. The council refers staff report P 2021-21, request for a potential review of materials and design guidance in the downtown Collingwood Heritage Conservation District Plan to staff and the Heritage Committee to provide the opportunity to review correspondence from the BIA. Kathy Jeffrey will move this. Can I have a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Hall. Would any members of the standing committee like to add any comments at this time? Deputy Mayor Hall.
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. First, I had indicated earlier today to you and the other members of the committee and staff that I would be late tonight. I didn't anticipate that I would be well over an hour late, so I do apologize. And I see that this item was moved down the agenda, so I appreciate it. And I apologize to those that had to wait to speak to this particular item. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that those individuals will be sticking around for additional staff reports as they relate to heritage as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that in this particular case, the system is working in terms of communication and dialogue. I know that the issue of materials and others related to the Heritage District have been a challenge for conversation over a period of time. And I think that when the issue was first brought forward and the staff recommendation that if the bylaw was to be opened up, that the cost that would be incurred would be somewhere around $100,000. And I know that when that was brought back to the table for the board of directors, and I'm speaking, of course, in regards to the board of the BIA, I think that they were quite unanimous in both their support and understanding that nobody was interested in spending that kind of money to reopen a bylaw for discussion. And so I think they're appreciative of the fact that they've had an opportunity tonight to, one, provide a deputation, two, to provide additional items for consideration that will go to staff for thought and then for return in terms of comment for this committee to give thought to. I agree with the two deputants in the context that I think that the downtown, and I used the languaging last week or 2 weeks ago when I was speaking about the bins, the waste bins, that are downtown as the jewel, and it's important that we protect the jewel. But at the same time, it's becoming quite evident that we have multiple standards. We have an incredible level of inconsistency, and I'm not sure how that inconsistency is going to be enforceable moving forward. And I really think, and I hope that we can start to give some serious thought moving forward to those inconsistencies and how we are going to be policing them. Because the playing field is very unclear as it relates to the Heritage District. So with that, I openly support referring this to staff. I look forward to their consideration, and I look forward to the other matters coming forward tonight. And I look forward to further discussions as they relate to the context of the 2022 budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would any other committee member have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? And that's passed unanimously. Thank you. Next staff report is 7.4 P 2021-32 Heritage Tax Relief Program Amendments. Director Valentine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In March of this year, committee requested that staff review the Heritage Tax Relief Program and that any proposed increase be brought forward as part of the 2022 budget deliberations in response to a Heritage Committee delegation to augment the rebate from 10 to 20%, with annual increases thereafter to a maximum of the 40% rebate permitted by legislation. So the staff report before you tonight does include a detailed review of the existing program, practices of other municipalities, and the potential financial impacts. In recognition of the importance of maintaining privately owned heritage assets in the town of Collingwood for the long-term benefit of all residents and to assist owners to cover some of the costs associated with the continuous care of heritage properties, staff are recommending that the rebate is increased to 20% or that rebate be considered by this committee. Though this does double the current rebate, staff are not recommending the annual 5% increases to the maximum allowable amount at this time, due to uncertainties with potential program expansion and uptake and the associated budget impacts, given the large number of eligible heritage properties in the town. So therefore, the recommendation in the staff report suggests that the program could be monitored through the 2022 rebate cycle to determine the impact of the doubling of the rebate, and then further increases such as the recommended 5% annually be revisited in 2023. And again, we have Community Planner Justin Teakle here with us who can speak to the details of his report.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. So good evening again, committee. So this is staff report P 2021-32, Heritage Tax Relief Program Amendments. In 2010, Council established a Heritage Property Tax Relief Program. Programs intended to support designated property owners in making regular investments and ongoing maintenance of their property to ensure the town's privately owned built heritage assets are conserved for the long-term benefit of all residents. The current program provides a 10% rebate to eligible applicants. The maximum permitted under the Municipal Act is 40%, and the current town budget for the program is $25,000. Eligibility requirements include that the property is designated either individually or as a significant property in the district, that the property is entered into a heritage conservation and maintenance agreement, also known as an HCMA, with the town, which establishes the expectation for the use of the refund. Eligible applicants have their property inspected by the town on an annual basis to ensure that they are in compliance with their agreement. On March 8th of this year, the chair of the Heritage Committee made a deputation to this committee and requested council consider increasing the rebate to 20% and then 5% per year thereafter until the maximum 40% is reached. And committee requested a report be brought back on that request. Presently, there are approximately 201 designated properties that could participate in this program. About 93 of those have HCMA agreements in place, and of those, approximately 40 apply regularly, amounting to approximately $15,000 in rebates. In comparing Collingwood with other area municipalities that offer more generous rebates, it's important to note that those municipalities have significantly fewer designated properties and would therefore not require as much staff time and budget to support a larger rebate. Staff are supportive of increasing the rebate to 20%, but are not recommending council proceed with the 5% additional increases at this time, as it's unknown to what extent the larger rebate would have on program uptake and their potential budget and staff workload impacts to additional applicants. Staff proposed to monitor the program impacts as a result of the increased rebate and report back in mid-2023 with any further recommendations. And that'll be following a full application cycle for the year 2022. To support the proposed increase, staff are recommending that council consider doubling the program budget to $50,000. To ensure that the program remains within that allocated budget, staff are recommending that the program bylaw be amended to permit prorating of refunds in the event that applications exceed the budget. Should council increase the rebate to 20%, the county and the province will provide matching rebates for their portions of the property tax, also at the 20% rate. So in conclusion, staff are recommending an increase for the Heritage Property Tax Relief Program from 10% to 20%. And further, to minimize risk and ensure the program remains fiscally responsible, staff are recommending that refunds be prorated should the program uptake exceed the allocated budget. Staff will monitor the results of the increases and report back in mid-2023. Staff are also requesting that council consider through 2022 budget deliberations an increase to the program budget to $50,000. That's all, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before you went to the public, I would propose when the time is right that I would be asking for that amendment by the staff wording in the report regarding the prorating. And I just wanted to say that now, if there was anybody who was going to speak from the public wanted to comment on that as well.
Thank you. I think I'll just ask Community Planner Teagle to comment on that before we turn to the public, because I thought I saw a draft bylaw that had the prorating written into it. Community Planner Teagle, is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. I believe prorating is described in the report, and it is, yes, it is on page 4 of my report. And then there is a draft bylaw appended to the report that does include that clause.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Clerk Dahl, would there be any members of the public who wish to provide comments to the committee at this time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's anyone that would like to speak to this matter, if you could please press the raise your hand feature. Sorry, it looks like I might have froze there and you might not have heard anything I said.
Oh, no, we didn't hear anything you said. You're right.
I'm like, why is there a pause? There's no one wishing to speak at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll read in the recommendation. The staff report P 2021-32 Heritage Tax Relief Program amendments be received, and that council enact and pass an amending bylaw to bylaw number 2010-020 to increase the Heritage Property Tax Relief Program rebate to 20% and to permit prorating of refunds when necessary. And further, that council consider through the 2022 budget deliberations, increasing the Heritage Property Tax Relief Program budget to $50,000. And further, that council requests staff to monitor the program and provide a report reviewing the impacts of the increase and any further recommendations for the Heritage Property Tax Relief Program by mid-2023. Can I have a mover and a seconder for this? Mayor Saunderson, Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Would the committee have any comments or questions on this? Mayor Saunderson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment to say that I'm in support of this. The Heritage District is an important part of our downtown and our community, but it does come to cost for our owners. And so I think this is a good way to balance the burden that a heritage designation puts on an owner by allowing tax recognition of that. And that in conjunction with the heritage grants will hopefully help to make it more affordable for our owners to maintain their buildings and benefit our community. So thank you.
Yeah, that's it. But any, yes, Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Doherty.
Just briefly to comment on that, I really appreciated the research in terms of the number of properties we have in comparison of other communities, because, you know, previous requests of council for the 40% have always been based on a percentage to percentage comparison as opposed to the reasons why. And I think the fact that we have probably a gazillion times the number of properties within town of Collingwood, it's very prudent of the recommendation that staff have made in this matter. So just want to comment with appreciation.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Chair. First, I have a question through you to Planner Teagle, and that is the comparison municipalities that are cited in the staff report. None of those, as far as I know, are Part 5 designations. That is to say, none of those have a designated heritage district. And so it's not surprising that there would be a substantially fewer number of designated properties as opposed to what we have in Collingwood. So I'm just wondering what kind of rebates are offered in municipalities where there is a Part 5 designation.
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty, that's an excellent question. I don't have that information at hand. I looked primarily at other Simcoe County municipalities that tended to be the reference points for presentations from the Heritage Committee Chair in the past. But you're correct, and that's primarily the reason why we do have significant more designated properties than the municipalities that are shown there, is because we do have a heritage conservation district, which encompasses a very large area, as council's aware.
I know you can't give me the answer right now, but I would be very curious to know what that answer is before this report comes back to council, please.
Noted.
The second item that I will, or point that I will make, is that I'm very supportive of the increase, the proposed increase. This municipality puts a lot of emphasis and a lot of priority on heritage in our community. So it just seems to me that we need to put our money where our mouths are when it comes to encouraging building owners to comply with the bylaws. However, I feel as though to cap this proposed percentage increase at a fixed dollar amount has been and will continue to be a bit of a disincentive, because there is no guarantee once you put your application in that there actually will be any money left in the kitty in any one particular year for you to be successful in your application. And so I would far prefer to see an uncapped budgetary item, like almost everything else that is in our annual budgets. We set a figure to them, but from time to time, those budgets are exceeded, and we allow them to be exceeded, or we don't allow them to be exceeded, but we still pay the bills. But in this case, we're just cutting it off. I know that you very astutely included an estimate of what it would be if every single property made the 20% application every year, and the figure you quote here is $150,000 a year. And while I'm not trivializing that amount, it is a relatively small portion of the total municipal budget. And it's also highly unlikely that every single property would make that application year by year. And I just would like to do whatever we can to ensure that the program is taken advantage of, and thus our heritage building owners are reinforced and rebated for their investments in their properties. And those are my comments.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Hull.
Thank you, Chair Hamlin. Through you to staff, with your indulgence, I have several questions. One, in layman's terms, how does the program work?
So through the chair, so essentially, to be eligible, you have to be a designated property, either individually under Part 4 of the Act or designated in the district under Part 5. You also have to have a heritage conservation and maintenance agreement with the town, which sets out the terms for the use of that rebate and for the maintenance of your property, because designation alone doesn't compel property owners to maintain their properties. So those are the key things. And then you have to submit an application every year. And then those applications, if they meet the eligibility criteria, then inspections are done in the fall to make sure that the property is being maintained in accordance with that heritage conservation and maintenance agreement. And then at the end of the year, so for the 2021 year in early 2022, if your inspection is good and you've met all your eligibility criteria, then a rebate check is issued and mailed to the property owner.
Any follow-up?
Thank you. Yes. So the program, in essence, then is a voluntary program. on behalf of the homeowner?
Correct. There's no obligation to participate.
Okay. So we've seen recently, I think within the downtown, and you hear people comment, and I say this in a positive, and that is that, there have been a couple of examples of buildings that have been recently renovated, or they're going through a renovation, and where, brick that long ago was covered with whatever is now being re-exposed, and interesting characteristics are coming along. And obviously these individuals, and one of the sort of the underlying hallmarks is that these things happen to happen when the building transfers ownership. But unless these individuals apply for one of these two particular programs, the cost that they're bearing is solely on them in terms of what they're doing.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. So the property who's next door that has been derelict for 30 years, what are we doing as a municipality through either this program or others to incentivize them to perhaps improve their building? And I'm speaking more from a holistic macro perspective. I'm not concerned, quite frankly, about the individual building, but I am concerned that we keep giving lip service to this downtown district and ensuring that it is the jewel that it is. So what is it that we could or are doing to ensure that the properties that year in, year out could use a little TLC don't seem to get it? And are there things that we could do to maybe ensure that this program is in front of those particular owners so that they have an understanding of how they could take advantage of it?
Maybe Planner Tico?
Yes, through the chair, there's always more that we can do to promote the program. And I think certainly, increasing that and all of our programs, I think increasing the rebate certainly will make it more enticing, hopefully, and will increase uptake of that program. That's part of the caution about, however, of raising it too high in terms of how much of an uptake we get, given how many designated properties that we do have who could potentially participate. And we hope that more of them do participate. We do also have a third program. We have a major restoration program, which does provide deferral of the tax increase resulting from the assessment increase from a restoration project that's undertaken over the period of 10 years. So there is that program also available for a situation where a property is very derelict and does require a lot of investment to bring it up to par. And we do also have within our property standards bylaw some guidelines, policies that dictate the minimum maintenance for heritage properties that is required to ensure that the heritage attributes are being maintained. So in the event that there are heritage attributes that aren't being maintained, we do have a mechanism to go out and make sure that they are being maintained.
Just maybe one last point, and that is that I think this is an excellent report. I appreciate the presentation that was made earlier this year that was the genesis in requesting this report of staff. And I'm fully supportive of it. In fact, I would be inclined to actually go further in terms of the percentage that we're looking at today. But for today, I'm inclined to support what's here. But I think that I would like to circle back to what it is that development operations as a committee or a council and or staff collectively could do to zero in on focus in on properties specifically within the district. And I'm talking properties that would be pre-Second World War. So there's no dispute in terms of whether they're significant or not, that have been allowed, quite frankly, to fly under the radar from any complaint as it relates to the condition of the building from a property standards, the neglect, et cetera. So that if we are going to encourage and reward and see, a certain group within the community, and Mr. Lex, who spoke tonight, would be the gold standard to that. I think to ensure that the entire district is maintained to the best that it possibly can be, that we that it become incumbent that we start to maybe put some teeth and some policies in place to ensure that those that choose to simply own a property for the sake of owning a property, but who are not interested in investing. And these examples, actually, I really, you could actually step away from heritage. I mean, these are property standards issues that they happen to be in a district, but you could make the argument that they are property standard issues regardless of where they're located. And I just think that we need to have that conversation. Again, it goes back to the inconsistencies. But I appreciate the report and happy to support it tonight. Thank you.
I wonder if Deputy Mayor Hall, you would be looking for a vote on a staff report to come forward on how the town can incentivize owners of significant properties in the Heritage District to upgrade their properties.
I would like to do that, but my track record right now is about 0 for 10. So I think maybe I'll give some food for thought as to whether or not it's worthwhile. And if it is, then I'll maybe pursue it another time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments? Councillor Doherty.
Sorry to come back on this, Chair. I did mention that there was one point in the staff report with which I disagreed, and that was the cap on the amount. However, I don't want to not support this staff report this evening because of that. And I'm going to assume, and I guess this will be through you to the CAO, that this will still come to our budget discussions. And at that point in time, we can have a more fulsome conversation as to what figure is in that line item. Would that be correct?
CAO Skinner, could you respond?
Thank you, through Chair Hamlin to Councillor Doherty. Yes, we can have that conversation as part of the budget conversation. And as well, we can also have that conversation later in 2022 when the results of the applications for the grant have actually been received and are in hand. Or alternatively, as the report recommends, we can use this as, sorry, it's not a grant, it's the tax we're talking about, I believe. We can also use this year of 2022 to understand, what will happen when the new levels are proposed and rolled out, so that we can understand how many people are interested. Thank you. So those 3 opportunities exist.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? So we'll bring this to a vote. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 7.5, this is the 5th staff report, of course. The report before us is P2021-33, County of Simcoe Official Plan Municipal Comprehensive Review, Municipal Growth Forecast / Allocation and Land Needs Assessment. Director Valentine, are you presenting this report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will be providing the presentation for this report, and I'll just give a moment for the presentation to appear on the screen. Perfect. So this evening, we do have a brief presentation for you on the County of Simcoe's Municipal Comprehensive Review Project, and that's to assist this committee and the public joining us today to better understand the purpose of the exercise and the process that we are following. So next slide, please. So let's start with the basics. What is a municipal comprehensive review? It is a land use planning process to align the county's official plan with the province's growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The growth plan is the Ontario government's initiative to plan for growth and development in a way that supports economic prosperity, protects our environment, and helps communities achieve a high quality of life, in recognizing that the Greater Golden Horseshoe is one of the fastest growing communities in North America, and growth should be planned for in a way that benefits communities and represents the most sustainable development possible. So with that overarching provincial growth plan, it does need to be implemented through upper and lower tier planning policy and zoning bylaws. So in doing so, the county municipal comprehensive review process is intended to prepare policies that establish the overall development pattern in the county to the year 2051. And those policies that are developed, they will be housed in the county's official plan, which is the document that provides a framework for future growth and change across the county and which will inform county council's decisions on land development. So the county work will then in turn set the stage for lower tier planning, and in particular for our context, the town's official plan review. So that's a long-winded way of saying the province sets the policy framework, the county will implement it at their level, and then the details will be fleshed out at through the town's official plan review. Next slide, please. So admittedly, the tagline Municipal Comprehensive Review is a bit unfortunate because it really doesn't convey to the public the importance of this exercise. It sounds very technical in nature, and it may not really resonate with the community on how the framework that does get established by the county will then need to be implemented and put into action at the lower tier level, which is the town. So in addition, the Municipal Comprehensive Review is about more than just growth management. It includes natural heritage and agricultural systems reviews that are established by the province. It includes climate change resiliency and watershed management as well. So while the public has been invited to participate in working sessions related to all of these various topics of the Municipal Comprehensive Review, the ultimate product will be an amendment to the County of Simcoe's plan, which will then trigger another round of formal public consultation on the actual policy document. The amendments would then be forwarded to the province for approval with a deadline, a looming deadline of July 2022. So I'd also note here that the town of Collingwood is also undergoing our official plan review, which is informed by this Municipal Comprehensive Review process and the growth plan policies more broadly. Next slide, please. Through the MCR, excuse me, Chair, though the MCR has many components, the focus of today's presentation is the growth management piece. So what happens is the province undertakes growth forecasts to 2051 and then allocates those growth numbers to upper and single tier municipalities around the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Those upper tier municipalities then work with the lower tier municipalities like the town of Collingwood to project how much population, housing, and employment to plan for in their part of the county. So this slide shows the growth that the county is required to plan for by the province. These numbers are not open to debate through the Municipal Comprehensive Review and have been firmly set by the province. Next slide, please. So how does the county decide how much population and employment growth to allocate to each lower tier municipality? I hear often the analogy that it's like dividing a pie, but I think that's a bit misleading. It sounds like whichever municipality is most hungry for the growth gets the biggest piece. That's not really what's happening. What's happening is that the county looks at a number of things. They look at historical growth patterns. They look at demographics. They look at community patterns such as migration, commuting. They look at current market demand. They look at employment types and locations, and they look at it all in comparison to the framework that the province has set for us with respect to planning for growth, including looking at intensification and density targets. So really, instead of dividing the pie, they're trying to guess based on they're trying to provide an informed estimate based on a number of parameters of where that growth pressure is likely to be, and how can we plan to accommodate that growth in the way that most benefits our communities. So that last point on the slide means looking at areas in which the County of Simcoe has been designated for settlement. These are areas where hard and soft services exist and where complete compact communities can develop in a way that minimizes sprawl into agricultural or important natural heritage areas. Settlement areas are to be the focus of growth, and land in those areas should be used efficiently, putting a priority on intensification where services and amenities already exist before we put aside more land for development. The town of Collingwood has been designated by the province as a primary settlement area in the county. Next slide, please. So the county has undertaken the forecasting exercise and they have provided us with preliminary results. And you can see here on this chart, we've got all of the participating 16 municipalities in the County of Simcoe's Municipal Comprehensive Review. The town of Collingwood is highlighted there in the red. So the population projection is to grow approximately 66% and employment by 59% to 2051. And please remember that these numbers are in draft at this point and the county is currently seeking input. Next slide, please. So the growth projections on the previous slide are then used by the county to determine, okay, how much land do we need to accommodate that growth? And as part of that exercise, the county has divided the municipalities into 2 regional market areas. And you'll see from this slide that Collingwood is in the northern regional market area, which collectively is considered to have more moderate growth pressures. And at this point, more land is anticipated to be needed in some parts of the collectively more faster growing southern portions of the county. Next slide, please. So putting it all together, this chart shows us a few things. As I mentioned earlier, the town is reviewing its official plan in parallel to the Municipal Comprehensive Review. As part of the town's review, the consultant did a similar forecasting exercise for population, housing, and employment to 2041. You'll note that the employment projections on this chart are pretty consistent between the county and the town's work. However, the population growth that was thought to be stronger by the town's consultant than the draft county projections. So staff will be requesting further information about the assumptions and methodology followed by each process to understand if those numbers can be better aligned. The alignment is important because right now the county is indicating that no additional land is needed in Collingwood to accommodate residential housing. The town's consultant is suggesting that possibly over 800 units are needed to be planned for by 2041. The county's draft numbers also suggest that the town the town not only needs to protect the existing employment lands that we have, but also to designate more in the future. Next slide, please. So those were the early results that the county has released. Again, they are preliminary. So let's move on to talking a bit about process and timing. As mentioned earlier, the products of the Municipal Comprehensive Review will be amendments to the county's official plan. The first will provide an approved set of population and employment allocations to the lower tier municipalities and identify how much land is needed to accommodate that growth in the municipalities. The second part, maybe the trickier part, will be the county working with those lower tier municipalities to determine where should that growth go within our communities? And that would include expansions to settlement area boundaries or designating more land for growth within existing settlement area boundaries like the town of Collingwood. Next slide, please. So we did have an update. So this slide does not reflect what you see in your staff report. Late last week after the agenda had been published, we did get an update on the timeline for the Municipal Comprehensive Review. So this slide is the correct one as opposed to what you see in the staff report. So we would note that the county heard from several municipalities, including staff at the town of Collingwood, that the timeline was much too ambitious for staff and council to provide meaningful feedback on the growth numbers. So we're happy to report that the county did expand the timelines to December to allow municipal councils to consider any feedback that they wish to provide during their November council and committee cycles. So it's staff's intent. We do have a number of questions, as I mentioned, for the county. As well, we are monitoring the public consultation and looking at the comments coming through that process. So we would like to consider all of that additional information and then provide back to you a report in November for your consideration on what staff are recommending the formal comments should be to the town on the county, on this process. Next slide, please. Okay, so while the formal comments from the town would be anticipated in November, through staff-to-staff discussions with the county, the following high-level concerns were expressed. And we would note here that the county has been very responsive to these matters and have already made adjustments in the numbers or have provided further rationale to staff. So with the town official plan review and the municipal comprehensive review proceeding in parallel, there are concerns about the alignment of the two processes and the time horizon used for growth management purposes. So that was 2041 was what the town's process endeavored to look at, and the county and province is looking at 2051. As we've already discussed, staff would like to further explore the differences between the county's growth projections, their assumptions, their methods, and their results. And with respect to these first three bullets, staff are reasonably confident that a mutually beneficial solution can be found, given the successful interactions that we've had with the county to date. That's the good news story. So likely the largest outstanding item is related to infrastructure availability, capacity, and cost. Lower tier municipalities relying on their neighbors within the county for water and wastewater services, particularly servicing capacity may constrain the ability to meet growth projections in some local contexts. So of particular concern for the town of Collingwood is that there is an implied responsibility that the town of Collingwood will provide water to support the planned growth in the other local municipalities within the county, especially those in the faster growing southern region market area, which ties to the next bullet on the slide. The division into the market areas, town staff have indicated that this should not minimize the population and employment growth potential of the northern primary settlement areas, including the town of Collingwood. We are regional service and tourism centers, and the appropriate growth should be allocated to these areas rather than simply justifying more boundary expansions in the south. And then lastly, the timing for the county consultation program is quite ambitious, as I mentioned. And while we appreciate that the county is working to the province's mandated schedule, meaningful consultation with local councils is challenging within the compressed timeframes. So some adjustments have been made by the county, and staff will continue to press for adequate time to allow lower tier councils to provide feedback. Next slide, please. So what is next? Staff and town consultants will further review the draft allocations and land needs assessment data and provide all of our outstanding questions to the county, and also monitor the feedback that the county is receiving through the public consultation process. So based on the responses received and the public input that is shared with us by the county, staff will prepare recommendations for this committee and council to consider in the November committee council cycle. And any resolutions passed by council will then be forwarded to the county as Collingwood's formal comments on this portion of the municipal comprehensive review. Next slide, please. So before we cap off the presentation, just thought it would be interesting to show you the format and level of detail available on the draft growth management numbers. We did simplify the chart for the purpose of communication and clarity in the staff report. But if you'd like to delve more deeply into the numbers and you go to the county's website, which is linked in the staff report, this is what you will see for the town of Collingwood. And if you need any help accessing this information, staff will be happy to send you a link. Just to leave you with two important points. So firstly, the growth projections and associated land needs are preliminary. So they may change prior to the final drafts being presented to county council in November. So keep that in mind. And second is that the county is listening. We've already seen some letters come through town councillors. And as per the resolution in the staff report, we would encourage any interested member of the public or organization to participate directly in the county's consultation program by providing written feedback or attending a consultation session. And also, as per the recommendation, we are asking that the county share all of the comments that they receive with town staff so that they can also be considered in the formulation of our professional recommendation, as well as in the town's official plan review as applicable. And then lastly, Chair, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize community planner Nathan Wukash, who did the legwork on this report and putting the presentation together. Both Nathan and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the public? Deputy Clerk Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this item, please raise your hand. And no one wishes to speak at this time.
All right. The recommendation before us is as follows: that staff report 2021-33, County of Simcoe official plan, municipal comprehensive review, that's MCR, municipal growth forecast / allocation and land needs assessment be received, and that landowners, developers, community organizations, and other interested stakeholders be encouraged to provide feedback directly to the county through the MCR, and that any comments received by the county be requested to be shared with town staff for consideration in any follow-up reports on the MCR or the town's official plan review as appropriate. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Doherty, thank you. Would the standing committee like to ask any questions or offer any comments at this time? Yeah, Councillor Doherty and then Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Director Valentine. Thank you very much for this summary. I was able to take in the presentation last week, and there was certainly a lot of detail and a lot of numbers to try to absorb. And I'm very gratified to see the concerns that Collingwood town staff are already expressing with this very preliminary draft. One item that was of concern to me that you have alluded to, but and I may be misinterpreting the numbers, but maybe not emphasized even enough, is the fact that while the county are proposing that our job numbers would increase into 2051, in fact, proportionately, they're actually decreasing, because if one considers the job to resident ratio from 2016, which was about rounded off 50%, the county's numbers drop us down closer to 40%. So that is a concern, added to your concern about the difference in projections in employment between the north and south parts of the riding. The other item that you don't mention, but I think is a concern, especially for a municipality that has declared a climate crisis, is the fact that there is a concentration of jobs in the south part of the riding and along the 400 corridor. The implication being that those in Collingwood who are employed will have to commute for higher paying jobs. And this will be contributing to our greenhouse gas emissions and doing nothing to mitigate climate change in this county. And I was surprised really that there seemed to be no acknowledgement of that in the presentation. So I look forward to hearing more detail from the county, from yourselves. I will make comments myself to the county, and anyway, thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very important process in terms of our planning for our future and the stresses that it will bring to our community. And my one comment to our staff is that when I look at our numbers compared to our neighbors' numbers, there is a large disparity, especially if you compare ourselves to Clearview Township. We're going to be growing by 7.2% over the time span with the population numbers of well in excess of almost 20,000 from today's population. When we look to our neighbors in Clearview, their population will only be expanding by 3,000 over that same period of time, which is 0.6%, or sorry, 1.3% total. And my concern is that perhaps in the planning processes, they target areas that have significant infrastructure. And it's a matter of convenience on the idea that the infrastructure is there so we can put these numbers in Collingwood. Whereas the infrastructure may not exist in some of our neighboring municipalities, so they get deprived of the opportunity to grow with all the tax implications and infrastructure. So it seems to me that infrastructure shouldn't be the magnet. It should be a topic of discussion. In other words, for areas that don't have the infrastructure, I think the province needs to figure out how to give those areas infrastructure so that we can share more equitably the population growth, so that areas that do have the infrastructure aren't being burdened in the way that I think Collingwood is going to be burdened. And lots flow from that, including what Councillor Doherty said in terms of our climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. The concern for me is that we are targeted for growth because we have infrastructure, we have a settlement, a fairly defined settlement area, and it's a matter of convenience as opposed to what I think is maybe more thoughtful planning for our future and our residents' future. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment at this time? Councillor Jeffrey?
Just really briefly, when I went into the county site and the information, I think that was the chart that Director Valentine showed us. It was broken down into housing types and supply. And one of the big conversations in terms of affordable housing, just not in Collingwood, but across the country, is the continuation of building single family dwellings and the impact on our infrastructure versus building a more directed house supply that will allow us to house more people more affordably. And I saw that discussion occur somewhere in the MCR, and that I think should be very important for us going forward as a community.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from anyone? I'll offer just a few comments. I am so glad that Director Valentine, you and your staff are on this. This will be really the most important thing for us, in terms of planning our growth, to have sufficient input and to raise what's important to us. I think, I agree with the mayor's comments about the convenience of infrastructure. And that although we of course have to grow, but it shouldn't be at the expense of making sure that our neighbors don't also have that benefit. I think it's important that we take a firm view of the importance of our employment lands. And although I know the province and the county do give, weight to that, I want to make sure that it's recognized that just as we're a regional center for retail, shopping, and service provision, including physicians, we also have the industrial parks and are attracting those kind of businesses that like headquarters and so on, that like to, locate amongst similar kinds of businesses for obvious reasons. And I don't know that that's been taken into account by the county. It seems to me they've just looked at, well, anyway, I won't comment on that. In terms of the, the supporting the resolution to the effect that all of our residents, developers, and stakeholders should be approaching the county with their comments, I think this, of course, is correct, and I would like to just raise with staff whether we should be taking to our quote airwaves to recommend this step be taken so that everyone has knowledge of the correct route to take. It's going to be our residents will look to us to take their views into account. And this is just a little bit different of a process for everyone to be following. Lastly, I wanted to ask about the direction of growth in our community. And historically, of course, our greenfields are to the west, as far as I recall, towards the town of Blue Mountains. But it does seem logical to me in some ways that if we were to grow further, as we will, that the direction would be south. And I'm just hoping that the staff could give consideration when you're looking at all this to what are the costs of infrastructure if we grow south. And I know that means into Clearview, as opposed to west, where we're going to eventually, growth patterns will hit the escarpment. And I know this is a huge point that I'm raising at this time because I'm suggesting where we should be growing as a community beyond our settlement boundaries, as opposed to into lands already within our community. But I am worried about the costs of infrastructure into areas that we're not currently servicing. I'm worried about where will growth go, after 20 years from now. For sure, it's not going to go over the escarpment. I think we can feel settled about that. And anyway, I just wanted to make that point. Thank you. Those are my comments. All right. So now is the time to vote. So all in favor of the recommendation before us? All in favor? And that would be unanimous. Thank you. All right, the last staff report before us tonight is 7.6. It's PW 2021-17, Transit Service Review and Optimization Study. Who will be presenting this report? Director Slama, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hamblin. I won't be presenting, but I would just like to say a few words at the beginning before I pass things over. So with us this evening, we have staff member Chris Wisniak, who is our coordinator of transit services, and he will be providing the presentation along with a representative from our consultant firm who completed the study, and that is Chris Prentice from IBI Group. So together they will summarize the transit service review and optimization study. I would like to highlight for committee that the recommendation in front of you this evening is that committee receive the report and allow for some additional time for council and the public to provide comments to staff. It is the intention of staff to bring forward a subsequent report. We are planning for the November Development and Operations Committee, and that subsequent report will include staff's recommendations about the service delivery optimization. So I just wanted to mention that before we begin. And with that, I'll pass things over to Chris.
Thank you, Director Slama. Thank you, Chair Hamblin and members of the committee. As part of the 2020 budget, Public Works and Engineering initiated a transit study to review the town's transit system. The last study that the town completed was in 2006. And typically municipalities and transit authorities review systems in a 5 to 10 year timeline to evaluate efficiencies, inefficiencies, new technology, and new ways of service delivery. The last study that was done in 2006 was done prior to the last transit restructuring and was completed by IBI Group, which was also the successful consultant for this round of the transit service review and optimization study. Now, this was part of the 2020 budget, and subsequently the pandemic hit, and we were able to review the transit system not only pre-pandemic, but look at ways we could apply new methods of service delivery and technology to meet the needs during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So I'm excited to introduce Chris Prentice. He's the Senior Associate with IBI Group, and I believe he's on here. Chris, are you there?
I am, yes, although the video doesn't seem to be working. I don't know if I control that or not. but I'm technically challenged with some of this stuff. So can you hear me, members of Chair Hamlin and members of committee?
Yes, we can
Oh.
definitely hear you. And your video in the bottom left corner there may be a mute and then a stop video.
Yeah, I was just trying it, and for some reason it's not working for some reason. I don't know why.
All right. Well, in any event, we can hear you loud and clear. So go ahead.
Well, that's what matters. You don't need to see me, as long as you can hear me. And I presume the clerk will be. Oh, good. There we are. There's the presentation. Wonderful. Thank you very much, clerk and Chair Hamlin, members of committee. My pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Chris, and the quick background. And I might say this follows on very nicely to the previous presentation by your director of planning about the future growth and what's going to happen not only in Collingwood, but surrounding Collingwood. So I think it's a very good segue into this topic. Next slide, please. So a quick background, although Chris did touch on it. The study initiated about a year ago, obviously after the onset of COVID-19. And the previous review, as he said, was in 2006. The pandemic, of course, has impacted transit services and ridership, not only, of course, within Collingwood, but everywhere. But we have taken that into account as we look forward. We've used the pre-COVID situation to understand what was going on with your transit service prior to that time, and that helps us look to the future and also balance that with where things are today. So I'll give you a high-level overview, sort of the Coles Notes version. You have a copy of our extensive report, but I'll give you the highlights and end up with the 9 recommendations for implementing our study findings and service plan. Next slide, please. So our terms of reference, or the scope of work, what you wanted us to do, but what we also told the town when we submitted our proposal of what we would be doing, first and foremost, was to evaluate the current transit service, the route structure, ridership, generally, how was the system performing, where was ridership occurring throughout the town, and how were the routes serving those needs. We then, from that, also carried out an extensive stakeholder consultation, which gave us more background, more information, more input to understanding what the town's needs would be. And from that, we identified and evaluated viable transit service delivery options, which is what you wanted. And then we prepared a level of service policy, some guidelines of how the service would be managed and planned into the future. We then were asked to look at, and this again complements the previous presentation about future growth. We were asked to look at area transit, about the neighboring transit services in the communities around Collingwood, to consider service needs, options, opportunities to coordinate, and the viability of trying to do that. And then last but not least, we were then required to ask to develop a 5-year service plan with ridership growth ways of achieving increase in transit use. Now, next slide, please. So what did we do over the last year? As I said, we reviewed the transit services and performance. What we did is we took the ridership counts by stop along all of the routes throughout the town, and then did a summary of how each of the routes were performing in terms of the ridership they were carrying, the revenues, and against the revenue hours, the number of hours that buses are on the road, how that all put together. And we have a presentation or a section in the report for that. We reviewed future town growth plans, population, land use, where growth would be occurring, and looking down the road. Not quite as far as the previous presentation took things out to 2041 and 51. We were shorter term, just looking at 2031, mainly because our service plan would be 5 years with a bit of a future look 10 years out. But still, it was rather informative in that within the next 10 years, the population of Collingwood is going to increase by 50%. So that's a significant level of growth. Then also to help everyone understand where Collingwood Transit sits in terms of how it performs, how well is it doing, we did a peer review of 6 similar communities to see what their ridership was, their costs, the net costs, the municipal investment, and how Collingwood compared to them. Although every community is different, there are similarities. And the municipalities that we looked at just very quickly were Coburg, Huntsville, Kawartha Lakes, Stratford, St. Thomas, Wasaga Beach. Now, we included Stratford and St. Thomas primarily because that's where Collingwood is going to grow in terms of their population. Stratford's about 34,000. St. Thomas is a little less than that, but similar. So that's where you're going. So there is some context for that comparison. And I know you're familiar with the other communities I just mentioned. And then when we saw what was going on elsewhere, looking at what the town is doing, was doing, where things are and where the future looks, we identified and evaluated 3 transit service options, 3 different ways in which transit service could be delivered within the town. We then reviewed the area transit, the South Georgian Bay area, as it might be called, or region, to see what services are being provided there, what their needs might be, and how Collingwood might play a role in that, and how Collingwood might benefit from closer ties and collaboration with those communities. And then we did 2 rounds of public consultation, as I mentioned earlier, February and July of this year. They consisted of a virtual public information center, PIC, website, and survey of information. And we presented initially in February our initial assessment of the transit system, how it was performing, where the needs were. And then in the second PIC, we presented these 3 service options for comment from the public. And then based on all of that, we have prepared a 5-year transit service plan with a look 10 years down the road. Next slide, please. Key findings then and conclusions from our analysis and the peer reviews and everything else. Based on your peer group, transit actually performs quite well in Collingwood, good ridership, good level of service. There's a low operating cost, but there's an asterisk there because the contract that you have is now quite a few years old and coming up for renewal. Not that I want to say much more on that, but I think it's a reasonable expectation that there will be some increase in costs, so that can affect the bottom line. You do have low fares compared to your peers, and again, that's a product of not having adjusted fares for quite a long period of time. So we think that that's an area that it warrants some action and some decisions in that regard. We also found that in assessing the system as a whole, performance trends, ridership has grown because of the Blue Mountain link. Service hours were increased accordingly. Now, productivity in terms of ridership per revenue hour, or hours that the buses are on the road, is low and has lagged behind because typically you have to put service out there and wait for ridership to start using it. So that trend was there, but unfortunately, COVID has put a very almost a block to that, interrupted that improvement. So there's opportunity to improve. With the existing route network, the 3 routes that you have, we found them to be circuitous and therefore inconvenient with lengthy trip times because they're circular, and that means, you know, it takes you forever, it seems, to go anywhere. And some key trip generators, such as the box stores, the major shopping area, and the Georgian College, are not well served. Plus, there are new areas sprouting up on either side of First Avenue that aren't being served. So there's a need to change and improve the services generally. The effect of COVID, ridership today has been about 35% of pre-COVID levels. That's not out of line with other municipalities. We're seeing even things like poor old Go Transit. Their ridership is about 15% of pre-COVID levels, but it's starting to improve as people start to go back to work. So there's optimism, but in our view and collective industry view, it's going to take several years for ridership to recover to the pre-COVID levels. And that's just really a product of people's, perhaps caution about going back out and gathering together, also going back to work, recovering, restaurants getting back, all sorts of things. So we just think it's going to take that time. And that's an important factor to look at as we look at what the transit service options are and ultimately our recommendation. Next slide, please. The brief word then about area transit. I mean, you know your neighbors far better than us, but we considered services to Stayner, Ottawa, because that's been talked about, working with the municipalities, work with Simcoe regarding the Wasaga Beach route. We think there are some opportunities there. And this again harks back to the previous presentation about growth coming together closer of all of these communities, and therefore people needing to get back and forth between those communities. So we think there's great opportunity. Even there are some links today, such as between Wasaga Beach and Collingwood. We think that could be strengthened. We see really a need to complete the triangle, if you will, with Stayner and possibly a service to Ottawa. Now, those are something that would be decided by your neighbors. Collingwood wouldn't be going out and offering or starting up service. You'd have to work with your neighbors to do that. But still, those are things to look at. One of the things that we found, staff resources currently within the town, Mr. Wisniak is doing a great job trying to juggle many different balls in his portfolio. And unfortunately, there isn't enough resources being dedicated to transit. But when we look at the other communities around you, they are even in more dire straits. They don't have very many resources. So frankly, banding together and doing many of the same things together under one umbrella, there's opportunity there to collaborate and perhaps help those communities do better as well as Collingwood. So utilize Collingwood's expertise, not only to provide a better service locally, but also to assist your communities and work together. And we believe that could be supported by service agreements, working with those communities to have them on a cost recovery basis, fee for service basis, have your staff oversee those operations and help them to manage their services better. And then to oversee that, we're suggesting the idea of a coordinating body with representation from each of the communities to lead and inform decisions, prioritize needs. And a dedicated transit staff person would report to that group under the umbrella of Collingwood. So some great opportunities, again, feeding into the what you heard earlier, sort of laying the foundation for what's going to come in the future. Next slide, please. Now, out of all of the analysis we did, as I mentioned earlier, we identified 3 different ways in which transit services in Collingwood could be improved. The first one is the obvious one, which is continuing with the fixed route network, which is what you've had and what people are used to, but it would need restructuring. As I mentioned, routes are circuitous, takes forever to go anywhere. Areas aren't served well. Some key trip generators aren't served well. So there would be a need to restructure the routes. But to do that and to cover more areas, that would add costs because you have to add route, you'd have to add a bus, and thereby more cost to do that. Still, it would be effective, the idea being to attract ridership, but there would be added costs. And with fixed routes, things are just as that word says, fixed. So it's more difficult to change routes. You can do it, of course, but to try and adapt to serve new areas, there's a bit of a challenge there. But that's where you need planning staff, transit planning staff, to properly manage and oversee the service. Then the second option is to go to an on-demand service. That is service being provided based on the needs of the community, needs of users. Now, this isn't Uber, rather what it would be, and there's a number of communities going to this approach. Stratford, Belleville, matter of fact, Fort Erie is going to it, and a couple of others. And what it is that buses are available. You use the existing buses you have, but they then, based on the demand, their routing and the times that they operate are all dictated by people calling in either to be picked up or those who are already getting a ride when they want to get dropped off. And that's all managed by modern apps that would guide the driver of the bus to know where they're going to go. The advantage of on-demand is that there's the potential to serve all of the community with the existing 3-bus resources that you have, and possibly to reduce costs based on demand on the, in the evening or on a Sunday, maybe even during the day when demand might be lower. Or conversely, you can add resources as demand dictates. But there is some cost to it to invest in the technology. There is the requirement to orientate users because people won't be familiar with it, but there's an education element to it. But still, that provides a very good strategy. It also can be scalable. As I said, you can increase and improve the service or reduce the amount of investment, the number of vehicles and drivers that are being utilized. And with COVID, because we don't know where things are going, how soon ridership will recover, then it can respond appropriately. Then the third option, no surprise, is a bit of a mix of fixed route and on-demand, where you would have a couple of core fixed routes supplemented by an on-demand service surrounding those core areas. And it's interesting, I mentioned Stratford. They, for example, are who have gone to on-demand service on Saturdays and Sundays and evenings. They have are about to introduce fixed routes supplementing their on-demand service because of how ridership has played out. In future, the on-demand could transform into fixed route based on the travel patterns you see, but that takes some monitoring of ridership and the travel patterns, and that's where transit staff and good management of the resources comes into play. Now, next slide, please. So out of that, all of that, we prepared our 5-year service plan, and based on everything that we see, particularly the growth that the town is going to see over the next number of years and into the future, but also the effect of COVID, our recommended service delivery model is to go to on-demand. Go away from the fixed route, go to the on-demand service that I just described. Progressively over the next 5 years, we would see service levels, the resources, the hours that are provided being increased to respond to ridership as it recovers from COVID, or as a result of population growth in the town. So as I said, on-demand can be scalable. You're not locked into the fixed routes. On the question of fares that I mentioned earlier, we believe that it's appropriate. It's time to consider a fare increase, modest one from $2 cash and $40 for a monthly pass to $250 and $50. We suggest that occur in April next year. That gives you time to plan and advise people, and then every 2 years thereafter review the fares going towards $3 and a $60 monthly pass in 5 years. There could be discounts as you have today for seniors and students, but those are the main fares that I'm highlighting. We also think that there's a need for fare integration with Simcoe Transit links, particularly for the Wasaga Beach service. because there is so much interaction between the two communities, rather than requiring people to pay two fares, there should be a fare break. Also, Lynx, as you know, has a service within Collingwood, and because they have a separate fare right now, people can't use that service to travel within Collingwood. So I think it's time to sit down with Simcoe and come up with an arrangement to have fare integration, where Collingwood residents are able to use the service, and those who are going back and forth to Wasaga Beach and elsewhere would have benefit of more cost-effective fares. Now, for the future, as I mentioned, because of growth, because of COVID, we see you monitoring your ridership, managing the service much more than you have. That's a real key thing to make sure that the service remains effective and useful into the future. And as I indicated just a moment ago, ultimately, you may transition back to fixed routes if that makes sense once you see what the ridership patterns are and the ridership levels. Next slide, please. We would see an increase in staff resource. Approximately, you have about 40% of Chris's time thereabouts is dedicated to transit. We believe that with the changeover to effectively manage and monitor the service, there's justification for increasing your staff resource to 1 FTE. And if you do get into agreements with your neighboring municipalities and help them with their transit services on a fee for service basis, adding a half a FTE in the future. Then we know the topic of electric buses has been brought up. We believe, yes, there are a lot of initiatives out there. We're not recommending you go out and convert the fleet to electric bus because, for one thing, your bus fleet is fairly young, so you don't want to throw away good assets now, but rather look at how this technology is evolving. It's not simple to convert to electric buses. There are implications both on how far the buses can travel in a day. It can have an impact on your contractor because they'd have to train their maintenance staff, how the buses and where the buses would get recharged. All of that has to be looked into. And that has some electrical or hydro and local electric supplier issues. So that needs to be looked at, but we're suggesting that over the next few years, look at that with a view to, in future, investing in electric buses. Then our sixth recommendation is to, with the next contract next year, because the current conventional service contract expires at the end of June, that the specialized service that you have, which is now operated under another contract, the two be put together. And there are opportunities for, we think, some cost savings, but also greater utilization of combined resources to deliver a better service. Then number 7, this is really something that we have to emphasize, that the town really, rather than just running some buses and changing things, you really got to be proactive to promote transit use, inform the public, convince them of why public transit is good. And when you look at, again, the previous presentation about where growth is going to occur, intensification, densification, that just flashes public transit all over. So there's great opportunity to promote transit use and inform the public. Now, next slide, please. Going forward and sort of measuring success, the basis for improvement, we believe, as I said, on demand. It provides the lowest potential cost. It's scalable. You can improve as demand warrants. There's really limited options to reduce costs generally. Your costs are already low. The only way that you can reduce costs in terms of the municipal investment in transit is to raise fares. Well, we're recommending that anyway, or to cut the service. And both of those basically lead down a dead-end street. If you raise fares too much, too high, or cut service too much, you lose ridership, you lose revenue, And frankly, it calls into question why you're operating and providing a public transit service in the first place. But on the basis that the town wants to do that, investing in transit makes sense. And as we saw earlier, it makes sense for the future. So you want to maximize transit, increase ridership, but to do that, transit has to be useful and convenient. So our service plan recommends a level of service, fares, forecasts, future operating costs, revenues, and ridership. So going forward, you'd measure your success against those ridership targets and cost targets, net cost, and the revenue cost ratio. And then finally, just to say it again, you need to promote the use of transit to be successful. Next slide, please. And this is just a brief summary of the 9 recommendations that we have in our report. Obviously, procedurally to receive and adopt this report. The idea being tonight is to just present this report to you, take it away, consider it, think about questions that you need answered, and come back at the council meeting or before the council meeting with any questions, and then they will be addressed in due course. But short of that procedural, the next thing is adopt the on-demand service strategy. We're saying as of July 1st next year, which would be when the new contract would take effect, and combine the specialized and conventional services, implement the fare strategy and fare increase in April, explore pooling services and operations manager with your South Georgian Bay transit neighbors. Next slide, please. Pursue improved and additional intermunicipal connections with the county of Simcoe and Grey County, and work with those people to, particularly the county of Simcoe, to return the Collingwood-Wasaga Beach link to the town of Collingwood. If you recall, town had operated that service. It was part of your contract. We think that there's probably some potential cost savings and more rationale for it to be much more of a linking service and a combined service between the 2 municipalities. Again, as I said earlier, recommendation number 8, look at the feasibility of introducing battery electric buses, and then add staff resources to more effectively plan and manage your services. So with that, Madam Chair, that's our presentation. Next slide, saying, are there any questions? Be happy to answer them. I know the evening is getting late, but happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, sorry, I don't know why my camera is not working.
Well, we'll look forward to meeting you next time in person.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that detailed and comprehensive report. It was
all right.
Really, really good.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And so, Deputy Clerk Dahl, would there be anyone in the public who would like to ask questions or make comments at this time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's anyone wishing to speak to this staff report, if you please raise your hand. It appears that no one wishes to speak to this item at this time.
All right, I'll read in the recommendation that staff report PW 2021-17, Transit Service Review and Optimization Study and attached Transit Service Review and Optimization Study Report be received for information, and that an opportunity for comment from council and the public be provided through the Engage Collingwood platform until October 29th for staff consideration, and the staff return on November 8th, 2021 to the Development and Operations Standing Committee with staff's final recommendations for service delivery optimization. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mayor Saunderson, Councillor Doherty, thank you. Would any member of the Standing Committee like to speak? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments and then some questions. Just speaking for myself, I am delighted to see the recommendation that has come forward to continue with our transit service, but to make it fully on demand. There are certainly enough examples, not just in Ontario, but across the country, where fully on demand public transportation works and works extremely well. One item that I will note, last year I presented after the FCM Sustainable Communities Conference, the report from Cochrane, Alberta, who had recently transitioned to a fully on-demand bus service. And they utilized Green Municipal Fund dollars to assist them in that transformation. And I see clearly that we are anticipating additional costs here, and I'm hoping that we can explore Green Municipal Fund as a way of offsetting some of those costs. And speaking of costs, the Cochrane experience was that they experienced a 30% reduction in their operating costs in the first year. And although revenues will increase, so will costs on this model, such that we're not going to see a decrease in our net operating. So I'm just wondering why that would be as compared to Cochrane. Another question that I have is when we look at the hours of service, and in particular with the Blue Mountain link, if there is any consideration into extending the hours of operation. Right now they close down, if I read from the report correctly, at 8 o'clock. And yet the hill is open until after 9 o'clock. And of course the services operate after that. And presumably our transit service is transporting a lot of workers back and forth from the mountain. And so could that be a consideration? Would they actually pay us to do that? Gosh, I had one other question. Sorry, I may have to come back. Oh, yes. There was no mention of the potential to add revenue streams from advertising. And I'm wondering if that is something that was considered or could be considered. I understand from City of Barrie, although I haven't spoken to any of their operators recently, but I understand that when advertising revenue was introduced to the Barrie fleet, it had a massive favorable impact on operating, such that they were operating at near break even, which is, as you know, quite exceptional. And those are my questions and comments. Thanks. I guess comments could be, or questions could be directed to Director Slama.
Oh, okay. Director Slama, would you like to answer any of that?
Okay, so I think the first question was your comment about Cochrane and Cochrane experiencing a 30% reduction in costs in their first year when they transitioned to on-demand, and you didn't see any comments of that nature in the study. And you're wondering why, with the proposal to switch to an on-demand service, would we not see a reduction in cost? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So Chair Hamblin, I will defer that to Mr. Prentice, because I think he'd be better to provide that answer.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have to admit, I know of Cochrane having gone to on-demand, and I'd heard about cost reductions, but unfortunately, I don't know the actual details. Very often, many stories are the truth is in the details. So I'd have to see what they did and have a better understanding of where the cost reductions were. From our standpoint for Collingwood, given the size of the community, going to on-demand I did say that we do see the potential, there is a potential depending on demand for some cost reduction compared to what you've been investing in transit up till now, but that's really more of a wait and see. I can say that Fort Erie, who we've spoken to, are seeing some reduction in their costs once they go into on demand, but frankly, their ridership level has been a lot lower than yours. It's about a quarter of what Collingwood's has been. So the whole demand, the number of people wanting trips and that sort of thing will really help influence. And that may be the factor in Cochrane, that they may have been providing a lot more service previously compared to what the demand is. And once they saw that, that allowed them to reduce the investment. But from our standpoint, my standpoint with Collingwood, COVID, let's remember COVID is a different world right now. And so we don't want to judge things necessarily by today. You want to look to the future, but that's the advantage of on demand. It allows you to scale up or scale down and adapt as the future dictates. So that's the benefit of changing. So I'm going to look into Cochrane again, just to try and get a better understanding of what they did. But I think it may be that they may have been providing more than what they needed to start with. And as a result of the change, they saw a difference. By the way, I should mention that one of the savings that you will see with on demand, and this has been experienced particularly with Stratford and others, is a reduction in fuel operating cost of the buses, because they will not be constantly running. They'll only be operating when there is demand. So other times when there isn't demand, they'll be sitting sort of waiting and not consuming fuel. So there'll be a savings in that way. Sorry, a long-winded answer, but I hope that helps. And by the way, I'm here. I rebooted. Wonders will never cease.
I'd like to elaborate on that as well, Chris. I know that with some of the municipalities like Stratford and Belleville, costs were reduced where they had those late night hours between the 7 and 10 where they were running 4 buses. And then they did on demand with 2 buses. So they were cutting out 2 buses entirely. So not only operating costs and contract costs, but fuel costs and maintenance costs. So it's all relative to the size of the municipality and the number of buses that we're doing. I think that when we're starting off, we need to find a baseline service level. And I think that, like Chris had mentioned, at the beginning, we might see costs remain the same. But as we see the demand, and it's so difficult to determine with COVID, especially right now, but to identify that first year baseline and then go from there as we see transit usage either increase or decrease.
Correct.
But I think there are certainly tons of options, and I think that we can save. But again, it's all determined on the riders and the ridership.
Yeah. And to that point, if I may, Madam Chair, just build on what Chris just said. I mean, the objective here is to get more people using transit. I know cost is always a factor, but I think you want to have a service that is going to be attractive, convenient, useful. Otherwise, you're not going to appeal to people and you're not going to go anywhere. So I think the objective is to improve service, make it attractive, promote it, and get people out of their cars, basically.
Okay, thank you. Director Slama.
Thank you, Chair. So I think Councillor Doherty's next questions were about the Blue Mountain Link and consideration of extending the hours to make sure that we're servicing the employees. And looks like Chris has got a comment of that. And I'll just say this, the last one, which was the potential for revenue from advertising. We didn't look at that. I think that is something we can probably speak to in our staff report to council, give it some more thought and consideration and incorporate that as a potential in the long-term plan for the service delivery in our next report. So I'll just ask Chris to mention the Blue Mountain Link extended hours.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Doherty. The Blue Mountain Link, I think we're really at an ideal time for a lot of this. As soon as our contract is up with our current provider, our service agreement with the Blue Mountain Resort Village Association and the Town of Blue is also going to be up. I think that would be an ideal time to discuss these changes with that group because we're all contributing equally. Certainly, I think that begs the question right now at the time. We should bring it up with the group, and I have no problems, initiating that discussion. I do know that for each hour that we do run longer, it's a considerable increase annually in the budget. So I do have some numbers that I can put together and maybe even present that at our next meeting in November. And I also do have one comment on the advertising. In my time here, I've explored this 4 times for advertising, we've been asked. So the way that we looked at it was the most cost-effective way would be to outsource it to a third party who would handle the installations and the advertising management. Advertising is, the money comes from large volumes. So with a small transit fleet, it's difficult to retain a strong revenue off of 3 to 4 buses. The other option to move is into permanent infrastructure, which is shelters and bus seats and those types of things, which the Wasaga Beach, town of Wasaga Beach has. We ran into some issues with our sign bylaw and how that worked with the community improvement and community plan with having signage all over town infrastructure. So I think it's something that we can totally explore again, but I think it needs to be discussed with our building department and our bylaw department with regards to the signage and what we want to put advertisements on, and developing an advertising policy as well for content.
Great.
Any follow-up, Councillor Doherty?
No, thank you very much. And I'll look forward to hearing more about this.
Okay, thank you. Would any other committee member like to speak? Okay, I have one comment. We have, as you've noted in the report, large areas that aren't currently serviced with transit. And some of those areas have been allowed to develop on private roads. Like we have a lot of private roads and a lot of units on private roads. So I'm just wondering if some consideration can be given in the staff report when it comes forward to how we approach the need to get agreement to be able to access those private roads, or if we do need for access for buses. And that was it for me. Okay.
Madam Chair,
yeah.
for that private roads, would that be considering condo developments or would that be unassumed subdivisions?
No, condominium developments.
Okay.
Yeah, some are townhouses. Well, I guess they're all townhouses for argument's sake. All right, so then we'll bring this recommendation to a vote. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you for your time and your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Nice to see you all. Very
Thank
best.
you.
Cheers.
So the question now is to whether to take a short break, which I think maybe we should. We're near the end of the agenda, but there could be a couple of departmental updates and perhaps something under other business. So let's just take a 10-minute break, and so we'll reconvene at 8:19. Thank you. We'll just wait for a moment for Mayor Saunderson. Okay, so there he is. Can we proceed now, Deputy Clerk Dahl? Okay. So we're on number 8 on the agenda. 8.1 is the Collingwood Heritage Committee meeting minutes of September 20, 2021. The recommendation is that the minutes of the Collingwood Heritage Committee meeting held September 20, 2021 be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mayor Saunderson and Deputy Mayor Hall, thank you. Would the Standing Committee have any questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Hall.
Thank you. Just in the interest of transparency, I was late in arriving to the meeting tonight, as everyone was aware. Had I been in attendance, though, I would have declared a conflict specific to item 7.2 under the staff report. This is with regards to the heritage permit application for 12 4th Street West. In the minutes of this particular Heritage Committee meeting, there is reference to the property, but it is only in reference. There's no decision, there's no request, etc. So I'm just making people aware that, yeah, I read the minutes and I have no conflict. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? No. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. The consent agenda is next. I'll read in the recommendation. The council herein receive the general consent agenda and the motions identified below be approved. And further, that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the author and are not verified or approved as being correct. 9.1, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Site Plan Control Guide. 9.2, NVCA, Volunteers for Tree Planting Projects. 9.3, NVCA, Pretty River Dike Maintenance. 9.4, NVCA Board Meeting Highlights, September 27, 2021. 9.5, Collingwood Downtown BIA, Heritage Building Materials Feedback. 9.6, Request for Redesignation, the Gateway Center. And this is the staff recommendation. Recommendation that the request for redesignation of a portion of 839 here Ontario Street, 869 here Ontario Street, and 7564 Poplar Road, bracket the Gateway Center, be referred to staff for review in the official plan update. 9.7, request for redesignation, 49 Huron Street. And again, staff recommendation that the request for redesignation of 49 Huron Street be referred to staff for review in the official plan update. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillor Doherty. No one's asked for the matters to be pulled for further direction or instruction. Would anyone, yes, Councillor Doherty has something for discussion? Proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to quickly pull item 9.2.
All right, thank you. Anyone else like to pull any item? Nope, go ahead, Councillor Doherty, 9.2.
Yes, and just the flag for the public, the fact that NVCA, as part of their annual spring tree planting, are soliciting for volunteers for next spring. And if anyone is available or is interested in assisting in that endeavor, they can reach out to the NVCA either by telephone, or the author of the letter is Ms. S. Stevens.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. All right, all in favor? And that's unanimous, thank you. For departmental updates this evening, I know that Director Slama wished to address the committee, so we'll start with her.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I just wanted to mention that despite the gorgeous weather that we experienced yesterday and on the weekend, which was lovely, the Public Works team is working to prepare for winter snow clearing operations. So part of that preparation will include the removal of the temporary traffic calming infrastructure that was placed in the school area. So that's the speed cushions and the flexible bollards Public Works will be, over the next couple of weeks before the end of October, we'll be working to remove those pieces of infrastructure. And also before the start of November, they'll be heading downtown and removing the bicycle racks and the benches. And through the clerk's department, working with the businesses that have the on-street patios, and working with those businesses to remove the patios that were located in the parking spots, and to get ready for winter operations. So the hope is by November 1st, our streets and our sidewalks will be ready for snow plows and sidewalk plows if we needed in the month of November, which we hope not, but we never know.
Okay, thank you. Would any of the committee members have any questions or comments on that? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Director Slama. First of all, I will just state that the comments that I have heard relative to the traffic calming initiatives in front of our various schools have been received very favorably. I've heard no negative comments from anyone for what it is worth. So congratulations to staff and council for proceeding with that. I wanted to ask if there's any flexibility whatsoever in the timing to remove the speed bumps and bollards, just because there has been so little time passed since they went up, and just to allow more time for drivers to get used to these reminders that they should be reducing their speed limit in school zones.
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty, unfortunately, we really can't delay much longer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So typically Public Works, like we're starting preparing for winter snow clearing operations in October. And typically we were, initially I should say, we were thinking of, looking at removing those pieces of infrastructure earlier in October, but we recognize that because of the delay in receiving the pieces of infrastructure, we are doing our best to leave them in place as long as we can. But there will come a point that we do need to be proactive in the removal of that, so that, when we have some snow on the roads, we can meet our minimum maintenance standards. So we are trying to delay as long as possible, but the time is approaching.
Okay, good. Well, that's good to hear. And let's just hope that the snow holds off for a little while. Not too long, but a little while.
Any other comments or questions? I also wanted to just say those have been an amazing addition to the roads where they exist. Just speaking from my own observations, I can't believe the difference in how vehicles slow down and seem to be paying more attention. So thank you for that. All right, well, thank you. And is there anyone else who would like to do a departmental update this evening? No? All right, public delegations. Deputy Clerk Dahl, is there anyone who wishes to do a public delegation tonight?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We still have a couple of people in our attendees list, so if anyone wishes to speak to the committee tonight, please raise your hand. And there's no one wishing to speak at this time.
Okay, fantastic. What about other business? Any councillors have any matters for other business? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Chair. And I have two matters. The first is in regard to infill development, and in particular infill development that is taking place in our most mature neighborhoods. Just this past week, we have received complaints from residents about the appearance and incongruousness or apparent incongruousness of new additions or new builds in our mature neighborhoods. This is not the first time that these kinds of complaints have emerged. We have been hearing about them for some time now. There are many municipalities who carefully control the insertion of new homes in existing developments or provide architectural controls for those. And I'm wondering through you to Director Valentine, what can be done in this municipality to ensure that we are not compromising the look and the feel of our mature neighborhoods.
Director Valentine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the councillor. We're getting quite a few questions actually along these lines from the public, and the questions are coming at an opportune time. The town is reviewing its official plan, which would set the high-level policy framework for what type of development is appropriate in these existing neighborhoods. And through that process, we're also looking at the urban design guidelines, which is more of the architectural component that you're talking about, looking at lighting, window placement, landscaping, orientation of buildings on lots, and that type of thing. Following that, we would have an update of the zoning bylaw, and you had kindly provided some examples of municipalities that are doing a good job of architectural controls in that regard. So this is the right time to be asking those questions. And we have already flagged to our consultant working on the official plan review that there's a lot of public interest around how our existing neighborhoods develop and what they would look like in the future. And we've asked them to highlight this through the public consultation of the official plan review. Now, there's a number of options that the consultant will likely suggest, including potentially requiring architectural control documents to be provided with building permit applications, enhancement to our site plan control bylaw, and so on. But all of those come with, of course, pros and cons. And I do believe that this committee will also be hearing some important information from the Affordable Housing Task Force, because many of these structures could have the potential for secondary dwelling units in existing neighborhoods, which also is a very important pillar in addressing the housing crisis. So there's a number of factors to be considered, and we would look forward to some comprehensive public consultation and input through the processes that we have ongoing at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, and I will look forward to hearing more about that. Chair, the second matter that I would like to bring forward is the use of our boulevards, our street boulevards for private parking and or the alteration of those boulevards by paving or adding crushed stone or other structures. And I'm wondering what is our policy right now? Council did ask last year for the department to come back with recommendations as to parking and use of boulevards. And I'm just wondering where that project sits at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that question. Director Slamas, can I ask you for a response?
Yes, you can, Chair. Through you to Councillor Doherty, yes, that was one element that was identified as something for staff to look into and is an item on our operational plan. We have had some internal discussions between some of the divisions in my department and bylaw. We don't have anything drafted yet, and I unfortunately don't have a timeline for you when we'll be able to bring this forward. But I do recognize that it is on our operational plan, and it is something that we need to bring forward to council for consideration. And I respect the comments that you're bringing forward. Acknowledge them.
Okay. Thank you. Just to, through you, Chair, just to confirm, is it permitted for a resident to make alterations to the public boulevard?
Through the chair. Pardon me?
I.e. to pave, especially.
Right, okay. Through the chair, so my understanding is that there is no policy, there is no established policy that says one way or the other. The boulevard is typically is town right of way, and I wouldn't say that people are allowed to do that, but it becomes a matter of having the resources to investigate, even inventory and investigate and communicate with landowners, and even communicate to the broader public of what is allowed or not allowed, or what the process would be if you want to do that. So this is some of the elements that we're talking with bylaw about, trying to sort out, what can we do? What would we need to do? Like, what would a policy look like? What would resources related to a policy include? And so we're still trying to investigate that and see what it would mean. But in general, I would say it's mostly a resource element, that it's difficult for us to, and without a bylaw, I don't think we have the ability to enforce a change. It'd be difficult for us to enforce a change.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will certainly look forward to a report coming forward and hopefully recommending a bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any other committee member like to bring forward other business at this time? No. Okay, so then we're on to the Deputy Mayor Hall.
There must be a bylaw that exists, because I know that my neighbor was quite thrilled when he received a ticket for being parked the wrong way on the boulevard. So I just, maybe we could clarify what that bylaw is, and I'm happy to circle back and make sure that my information is correct. But that certainly was my understanding, that instead of being parked east-west, they were parked west-east, and received a ticket for doing so. It's a slow night.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
Deputy or Director Slama, did you want to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, yeah, we can look into that, but it might be, so that could be something that's within the parking bylaw. And it might be more related to that direction of the vehicle versus where they were parked, right? So I see that as a different matter to what Councillor Doherty was speaking about.
All right, so we're on
Sorry,
to
can
the
I just follow up?
Yeah.
I don't disagree, and I think that, but my point being, and maybe I should have been more specific, is that there is a bylaw as it relates to the boulevards, and it just would be interesting to see what that bylaw specifically states. Is it to what the director indicated, which it may very well be, or is there potentially the language in there that relates to some of these other items? Because Councillor Doherty is bang on the observations, and it is becoming a proliferated issue within the community. And the issue is twofold. One, it's that people are altering property that's actually not in their domain. And secondly, we've turned our front yards into parking lots as a result.
Yeah. All right, thank you for those additional comments. Who would like to move the adjournment? Oh, Deputy Clerk Dahl. Oh, we're not going to get to an adjournment.
Sorry, just
Go
before we
ahead.
go, I knew that there was a bylaw as well, so I've done a bit of digging while you guys are having your chat here. And it's
Yeah.
an old bylaw. It's bylaw number 8844 that allows planting and greenery on the boulevard, but it does not speak to paving for the purposes of parking. So I can circulate this to the committee just for your information.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, who would like to move an adjournment? Mayor Saunderson, thank you very much. All in favor? And thank you for the meeting, everyone. Good night.